clearest of discerning, and the boldest of the strength to make your way. The widest of all roads, and the soundest of all beds, and the warmth of friends who gather in the blessed name of dance and song. Unauthorized duplication is a violation of applicable law. We put this notice on our CDs and tapes, and we think we have a very good cause too. What you have heard here are our own creations. Entertainment Music is a small independent label. When you make unauthorized duplications, you're stealing the food from our table.
Cheap, me got them trying. Me gon' take them for a ride. My spot just went by. My flatboat's full of fire. My whole tribe's having fun. We gon' dance till the morning come. Me big cheap, me got my band. Just in right back near to me. Big cheap, I got wild food. down, go VIP. I reached the top and I had to stop, and that's what's bothering me. I wanna be a man cub, stroll right into town and be just like the other men. I'm tired of monkeying around, so ooh, 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 I wanna be just like you. I wanna walk like you, talk like you do. You'll see it's true, and ain't like me. You learn to be human too. Oh. I made a deal with you. What I desire is man's red fire to make my dream come true. Why don't you give me the secret, man cub? Clue me what to do. Give me the power, man.
Park City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
I'm here.
Councilmember Wright.
Here.
Councilmember Clay.
Here.
Councilmember Robinson.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
Okay, we're starting half an hour early tonight in hopes that we have a full discussion with the Task Force on Environmental Action. We keep bumping them because other things happen, so we wanted to make sure that we had a chance to get to that discussion early in the evening. I'll note one change in this evening's agenda. The special session agenda item number 1, the resolution commenting on proposed amendments to the commercial residential zone. I have pulled that item. I just wanted to note that all of these proposed revisions came in pretty late. We wanted to have a chance to review them further. We also know that there have been increasing concerns countywide about a number of issues surrounding this, and we have checked with Park and Planning and with the County Council to make sure that we understand the process of this going forward. If it in fact goes forward from the Planning Board on Thursday of this week, it'll go to the County Council sitting as the District Council and then come back to the Planning Board. So I've advised staff that maybe we can just send a letter tomorrow and make known our continuing interest and concern in that and say that we need more time to continue to review this, and I sense that there will be time. So I have pulled that item. Also just wanted to remind everybody that this is our last meeting of this calendar year. The council will be on break in December, and we come back first meeting on January 3rd. And also to remind folks that once we do get back in January, we go back to having award night, a Ward Night, not Award Night, starting in January, and the first up will be Ward 5, and that will be January 18th, and then we'll have one a month after that. And so at this point, we'll move to the public comment period, if there's anybody who'd like to make any public comments on anything not on our voting agenda this evening. Mr. Lovelace.
Yep, my name's Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland, your favorite peace delegate. I wanted to let you people know that even though you guys are going to be on recess, if you want something to do, you can always come over on Friday nights between 7 and 9 p.m. on Georgia Avenue at Walter Reed Hospital. We have our weekly peace vigil out there, asking for better care for our veterans and asking for an end to the war, to bring the troops home. That's what we're asking for. And we're hoping that we can get some people out there this season. This Christmas season and Thanksgiving season, the seasons we should be thankful that we're still around, that we haven't used an atomic bomb, and that we haven't destroyed our environment so bad that we can't survive, and that we have an opportunity still to bring the troops home and to make it better for our veterans. So if you want to come out between Friday night at 7 and 9 p.m., that'd be great, because we're doing it every Friday. And that's at Walter Reed Hospital on the Georgia Avenue side. Another thing, too, is I want to wish you people a Merry Christmas while I still got the chance before you guys leave for the season. You know, because, like you said, it's the last week of meetings until January the 3rd. Yep. So I won't see you guys until next year, and I want to wish you guys a Merry Christmas. And I want to ask you people, is it possible to encourage people, instead of getting trees to cut down and killing trees, I think we should encourage people to get trees that we can put in a pot, and maybe the arborist can help them plant them in an area around the city. If they can't plant them in their yard, there may be an area or a park. They can plant them in memorial of somebody, or in memory of their pet if they want. Doesn't matter, but we got to do what we can to get our tree canopy up. And I think one good thing is not to waste our Christmas trees. You know, I mean, we're supposed to be celebrating life. Not. You shouldn't be kill a tree for Christ. That should not be what we should stand for. I'd like to see us planting trees for Christmas instead of cutting them down, because that would be great. And also to encourage people to stay sober this Christmas and not drink and drive, because that can be a real tragedy, as we all know. And our children need their parents to grow up to, and our adults to look up to. And we've got to keep our children safe this season, and our adults safe this season. So please, I ask everybody out there who's listening tonight, do not drink and drive. And please, plant a tree that you can plant. Get a tree that's in a pot already. I mean, nurseries sell them all over. So I ask everybody, please, celebrate Christmas this way. I ask you this. I ask everybody, thank you very much for letting me share. Tacoma Park rules. Let us carry it on till the next year. Bye-bye. See you in 2011.
Thanks very much. Is there anybody else? Seeing none, city manager have any comments? Oh, sorry, council comments. Almost missed it. It got tucked up under there.
Subtext.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I was surprised to hear recently that community groups can no longer reserve Hefner Park for meetings. A resident told me that only paying customers can use the facility, and I'd be interested to hear the rationale for that change, since I believe that community is at the heart of our work. Secondly, in June of this year, I submitted a list to Tacoma Park residential properties that are not owner-occupied. The list is considerably longer than our licensed rental properties, and I would appreciate receiving an update on the Housing Department's analysis of that list. Specifically, are we losing revenues and how much? And what procedures are we implementing to verify that landlords register their properties? This is both a fiscal and public safety issue, and I would certainly appreciate an update before the end of the year. And lastly, I want to thank Councilmember Robinson for his leadership. His recent email proposal for a review of Tacoma Park's form of government seems to me to be very appropriate. I know this can be a difficult subject, but the result could positively impact the character of our city on into the future. And I hope everyone has a good and safe holiday. Thank you.
Councilmember Robinson.
I did put out an email in response to a constituent asking how our city government is structured, and I did a little research and put out some thoughts about that. Those questions came partly from our recent history in approaching the 410 ownership issue, and also a number of code violation citations in my ward. We've had quite a few, and I've had a lot of feedback from constituents about code violations and how they're handled. And we also explored that on our email lists, and I learned some things, both that code violations for single-family homes are followed, come into play both by neighbor, I'll call it referral, but really it's complaint, and also in something that's called a sweep by our code enforcement department. And there are enough concerns about how the violations, how people get cited and how that plays itself out, that I also heard of, I thought, a good suggestion on the part of one neighborhood in my ward that was calling for some kind of advance notice about where the sweeps and when the sweeps will occur, so that if code enforcement is going to cover a certain area, certain neighborhood, that neighborhood is informed in advance. And what that would do, at least the thinking is, what that would do is that it would allow people to start thinking about how they're going to repair or repaint, if it's peeling paint, or repair outbuildings and so forth, in advance of getting cited. And it would also allow the neighborhood association, if there is one in that area, to kind of pull together and help a person focus on properties that are in disrepair. In that light, I'd like to, if possible, get a list of the code violations and their streets to preserve the, so that people aren't embarrassed, just the street and the type of violation over the past year, citywide, so that we can kind of review ward by ward and street by street, if appropriate, how things are going with our sweeps. And if you can accommodate me, City Manager Matthews or Ms. Daines, I'd appreciate that. That will give me something to bring back to the neighborhoods. And if you'd also consider the idea of saying in advance where you plan to do these sweeps, it might make for a whole lot less hurt feelings and tough situations. That's all I have for tonight. Thank you.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you. I want to thank the trash pickup staff, not only because they do a good job at picking up trash in my neighborhood, but they are very kid-friendly. I know you don't think of the trash guys as kid-friendly, but I have some young kids in my neighborhood who are absolutely enamored of the trash guys. And one of them has become so enamored that instead of riding in his stroller like a normal kid would, he actually climbs on the side of it, the way the trash guys do, hanging on the side of the truck, and insists that his mother push him down the street hanging like that on the side of the trash truck. And the trash guys are absolutely so friendly to these kids and their requests and their adoration of him. It's just marvelous to see. And I know at some point when the kids get a little bit older, if they're still interested, the trash guys will, in fact, probably against city rules, allow him to ride on the side of the truck. I know for certain that they will make it seem like he's riding free without any supports, but I know they will make sure he's perfectly safe. For the 10 or 15 feet they let him ride on the side of the truck and completely make his day. So I want to thank them. The second thing I want to say is I thoroughly support Terry's request to find out, are we losing revenues is a great way to put it. And the third thing is I want to alert Ward 5 residents. I'll be sending around notices on the various lists, but Ward 5 night, or Ward night, coming in January is a great opportunity for residents to come and talk about concerns they have about Ward 5. And instead of just trying to funnel them through me, you can talk directly to the council. There'll be staff here. You can get answers to your questions. Thank you. Hope to see you all then.
Councilmember Wright.
Thank you. I'm glad to see that in early January we're going to have continue our discussion about the tree ordinance. I think that's something that we all are very interested in discussing further and seeing if we can improve. I know it's been something that's been pushed back because we've had more pressing issues, but happy to see that it's coming up soon. The second thing is I want to also support Terry's request. I hope that we can get an answer to the question about the unregistered rental properties, I think is the specific ask. Compared to the list that Councilmember Siemens provided. The third thing is to say I haven't read Councilmember Robinson's email yet. I think it might be an interesting discussion, the discussion of the structure of the city government. I would hope at least at the beginning we wouldn't occupy any city staff's time with that. And I think we should be very careful and understand what it is we're unhappy with and think about how that can be addressed. There are very strong reasons and a long history about why small and medium-sized cities instituted strong city manager models of government. And a lot of that has to do with depoliticizing the government, has to do with making sure that you have people who are professionally trained to run the government, which you often wouldn't get if you just elected people from a small or medium-sized town. And a lot of those, the reform around the strong city manager model is really a good governance reform. So I would encourage us to think about what it is we're unhappy with and how that can be solved within our structure. I don't think the issues that have been raised or concerns that have been raised can't be effectively solved within the structure that we have. And then lastly, I just want to say a happy holiday to everybody for the upcoming holidays, Hanukkah and Christmas, and a happy holiday to my council colleagues. I will miss you in some ways for the coming month.
Liar.
But I won't always miss that we're here late at night on Monday evenings. I'll miss you personally.
Councilmember Clay. Sorry, Councilmember Schultz.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I want to thank the Department of Public Works, the Tree Planting Department, which is the arborist, for planting new saplings along the 7300 and 7400 block of Wildwood Drive, as well as along Merwood Drive. Those have gone in between the curb and the sidewalk. There's about a 3-foot grass verge there, and there's quite a number of them. There's even a few in the median on Merwood, the wide median there, just at the entrance to New Hampshire. So really thrilled that these, some of them are white oaks, that this is going to be our future, part of our future shade, and they look quite well. And thank you for doing that. Also, the New Hampshire Gardens Citizens Association is going to be having a meeting coming up in a couple weeks, and that's in my ward, and I'd just like a couple Wednesdays from now, I'd like residents to be aware of that. If you're not already on the New Hampshire Gardens listserv, please join that so you can keep abreast of the schedule of meetings. In regard to Councilman Robinson's request for, or concerns, I guess is a better way of putting it, with regard to the so-called sweeps on housing code violations. I'd just like to comment, it's not something I had intended to comment on, but since you raised it, I think it's worth saying, is that the city's Department of Housing and Community Development initiated a housing code sweep in Ward 6, I guess probably around the beginning of October, maybe it was September, in which they systematically walk through or work their way from one end of the ward to the other. And the way this thing works is that the city, if they see a violation, they issue a courtesy notice to the occupant, to the owner of the house, of the property, to let them know that there is a violation and that they can get in touch with the city and get details on what needs exactly to be done and so forth and so on. It's not an abatement notice, it's not a notice of violation, it's just a courtesy notice to start things off with the hope that this will engender. And the nice thing about it is that everybody in the ward, we sent out information that this was going to happen. The nice thing about it is that everybody in the ward knows that everybody's getting treated equally, that no particular block or no particular property owner is being picked on or solicited or favored in any way. It's just a systematic thing. We normally rely on the complaint system, but sometimes violations occur, owners aren't aware of them, and maybe the neighbors aren't in a position or aware either that they should be registering a complaint about a property that may have something that they wouldn't even be aware of is a code violation. So this is a good way. And frankly, unlike in Councilman Robinson's ward, received 0 complaints about it. I think in general the comments that there have been the truth of the matter is there have been very few comments about it one way or the other. I've received periodic reports from the department on progress. The last I heard, as I understood it, was taking a lot longer than had been anticipated for whatever reason. That's fine. It's just the fact that it's getting done. So my take on this is rather the opposite of Councilman Robinson's. That isn't to say that his position on it isn't certainly an important one and one worth listening to. But I think personally that this is a reasonable, conscientious, and efficient way of going about getting, maintaining the quality and the appearance of our housing throughout the city, and I support this kind of work. Thank you. That's all I want to say at this time.
Councilmember Clay.
Thank you. There is a constituent that I have, called me yesterday, who has a corner lot like I do, and would be interested in planting several street trees on it. And I understand that the family called the arborist, and there were issues about the kind of trees they wanted and when that planting was going to be happening and what they might offer instead, and wasn't really good for the homeowner, and it just brought back the issue that I do have a lot of constituents, I think, that would be really interested in being able to determine what the street trees look like on their street. And I remember when I first came to the council, I brought my book from Oakland, which was this terrific book that they had made that showed all the sizes. Well, it essentially showed what the street trees looked like when they grew up in context to the scale of the houses that were common for Oakland. It was a great tool for the residents, because then they could get together block by block or along street by street and essentially pick out a common tree, and they would agree, and you'd get a majority on the street that would agree, and then the city would plant them, or in some cases, if you wanted them, that people actually pay it. I paid something like $500 to have, I think it was a jacaranda tree or something, planted in front of my house. But it's a great tool, and I think that the neighbors are capable of getting together and making decisions about that within a set of trees that are essentially approved by the city in making a long-term plan for the replacement and being involved in that. And I think the more that we can involve the community members in the selection of street trees in their community, I think the more likely they are to care for the trees and appreciate the trees that are there. There's some tree here, it's not a ginkgo, is it a ginkgo? What's the tree that drops things and smells bad? The ginkgo.
Male ginkgos.
Male ginkgos. Well, people have been complaining about that tree, but that's an example of like a tree that people, everybody says, oh, God, I hope they don't plant one of those trees in front of my house. And I do think that...
The sweet gum is also, that's one of the complaints with them.
Yes, I have. I ordered from the arborist a maple tree, and they didn't have them, and they planted a sweet gum tree in front of my house. But here's what I learned in that process. So they planted a sweet gum tree. They said it wouldn't have those little balls that have little prickly things coming out of them. And then sure enough, the next year, Piper stepped on a prickly ball and came into the house and was really upset. And the Public Works Director came out and looked at the tree and told me that the city actually orders a hybrid tree that doesn't have little sticky balls. And what had happened on my tree was that one limb had reverted, and I don't know how the biology of trees works, but one limb had reverted, and I cut it off. It was just a little limb, it's about this big. I cut it off, and the tree's continuing to grow without sticky balls for the last couple of years. So anyway, moving on, I would like to see us have some kind of a way that neighbors can engage, and would like us to be able to talk about that. I think there's been support for that from the rest of the council. I continue to support the issue of comparing our rental licenses to the property tax inventory. I've done that a few times in my ward. We didn't gain traction in the council last time. I just reported it to the state and to the county, and lo and behold, the people who were claiming that they were living in the house but instead were renting it and getting homestead credit, those changed in the next year. And I've checked on mine occasionally, and they haven't come back. But, it occurs to me that the guy who collects taxes for the state of Maryland lives in Tacoma Park. I think it would be doesn't the comptroller live here? Doesn't the comptroller deal with taxes?
That's right. He cares about that issue.
And, as a statewide, it might be a broader issue. Certainly it could be a broader county issue to look at this issue, because you're being dishonest. And I would even support going back after people for back taxes for the years when they have had rental licenses and they have claimed that they lived in the homes. My last comment before I wish everybody a happy holiday is about the mayor-council form of government. And this seems to have started out of an issue around code enforcement, which has now become an issue of who administers the city and who controls the city and what is the city's form of government. And I would just say, I would support a conversation about code enforcement and what we're doing with it, or the decision that we made to have 2 code enforcement officers. I would support that. But I want to say that the institution of a mayor-council form of government, where you have a professional administrator, essentially, in your city is broadly accepted in the country, especially in cities that are of this size. And a level of insulation from this kind of politics is the exact reason why a mayor-council form of government was instituted. So you don't have political pressure brought to bear around a particular issue, which then causes a whole reconstruction of your city government. So if we're going to have a conversation about the mayor-council form of government or other alternatives, I guess I would prefer that we do it more in educational forms here in the ward without having it become a big time consumer of our already strapped city government. With that, I'm going to say happy holidays to everybody. I'm going to enjoy my holiday coming up, and I hope you all enjoy yours. Thank you.
And I just wanted to mention one thing. Over a period of time, I've thought about and talked about coming up with a way or ways to have broader conversations with the community involving the council about our budgets and how those are tied to our strategic plan and our priorities. We now have a strategic plan, and I've continued to think about ways to do that. I've had some meetings over the last 10 days with a couple of citizens who are interested in helping with that process. I'll continue to meet with them. If there's other people who are interested in working on that, we have come up with some ideas about how to do that. If any of my council colleagues want more information, I'm going to provide you with some more. But if any residents are interested, please contact me. We're trying to come up with a way to, in relatively short order, come up with a format that will engage people in an educational effort in terms of what some of the issues are around our budget and our fiscal situation, and how we can have a broader input about how we go forward, what types of, for instance, environmental initiatives might be added in, how that works in terms of whether we just add those on top or replace something that we're doing, how we would go about doing that, and the fiscal implications for all of that. So hopefully that will go forward, and people are continuing to work on that. That effort is not taking a break in December. So if anybody's interested in that, let me know. And Councilmember Wright had one last little short comment on something.
I just wanted to remind my council colleagues that we tried to commit to making 3-minute comments, and I don't want to be banished to the end of the agenda again.
And now the city manager's comments.
Just a few items. At your places at the dais this evening, I distributed some information that the deputy city manager had pulled together about green streets. We had talked about this last week relative to Flower Avenue, and thought this might be of interest to the council. Also just wanted to share with you, I got an email today from Jerry Stocks of Washington Adventist Hospital asking me to share with the council that they will be holding 2 additional community forums on the proposed Fitness and Wellness Center. This was, as the council may be aware, a joint venture between Adventist Healthcare and Washington Adventist University. Those sessions will be held on December 8th from 7 to 9 p.m. and January 5th from 7 to 9 p.m. in the cafeteria at Wilkinson Hall on the university campus. And we will put some information on the website if anyone's interested. 2 last issues. Councilmember Robinson had gotten your emails over the holiday weekend and last week regarding code enforcement. Talked to Ms. Daines earlier today. We'll see what we can pull together. Much of the information that the council may receive may look familiar. We do provide information on the targeted enforcement activities for each of the ward nights that we did last year, as well as in the quarterly report, but we will just pull that together and see what we can also do about your request for information on violations over the past year.
Thank you.
Okay. And Councilmember Clay, in regard to the street trees, I'd have to dig it up. I think when this issue came up before, I had talked to the city arborist and the public works director and had sent some information out about it. My recollection is that what the public works staff felt comfortable with is maybe having a choice of trees for a certain stretch. They wanted to make sure that there was some diversity in the trees that were planted in the event of some type of illness, such as, Dutch elm disease or something. But I'll see if I can find that email and redistribute that to the council and see if that's an approach you all are comfortable with.
Yes, I would agree.
Okay.
And I think that's what we talked about with the other model. There's a range of trees to choose from.
Correct. I think the arborist felt comfortable with maybe 2 or 3. But anyway, I'll dig up that information again and send it back out. That's it.
Okay. Then we'll move along to agenda item number 2, which is second reading ordinance amending the Tacoma Park Code, Chapter 14.20, to repeal obsolete sections. Would somebody like to move second reading of the ordinance?
Move. Second.
Moved by Councilmember Snipper, second by Councilmember Clay. Are there council comments? Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to say? Okay. Is there any public comment?
Yeah, I recall, my name is Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland, your favorite beach delegate. One thing I want to comment on this is, I understand this is when we repeal a lot of obsolete rulings and stuff on the code and stuff, and one of them has to be a burying of dead animals, and if you have to get a permit or not for it. But I think, we should be also in mind that, what would we do if Nipper the cat should die? Do we have a right to bury him in our yard? I think we should, because children need to learn about what death is all about and what funerals are all about. And the pet has always been a part of our family. Unfortunately, when I was a kid, we weren't allowed to do that, but we did it anyway. We did it under the cover of darkness, which is not very good. But we did have service for our cat, and yes, we did. And it made a big difference on a child. I was only 12 years old. But I think a lot of children take their pets very seriously, as much as our adults do. And I think, that we should keep that in mind whenever we do anything with these rulings, that we should not have to get a permit, and people should not have to pay an exorbitant amount of money to bury their pet cat. It's one thing if it's a horse or a cow or something that used to, for work. It's another thing when it's a pet. A pet should be very, very carefully thought about, whether it's a horse or whether it's a cat. We should take our animals into consideration, our children into consideration, and our pets into consideration, as well as our families. Thank you very much.
Okay. Ms. Daines, do you have any information that you can share on that particular area? I know that the question came up last time, and there's information that says it is addressed in other parts of the code, but I wondered if you have the particular citation on that one.
I must confess to being perplexed by this particular concern, because what you're eliminating the prohibition of storing dead animals on the ground. It does not address burying of pets or requiring a permit or anything. At least I have not been able to find that in the text that's being eliminated or proposed for elimination.
Okay, so we're not doing anything either way that addresses that
So you
concern.
have to bury the little kitty if it's dead.
As long as you don't have like 450 cats that you want to bury in your backyard.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, this is a second reading ordinance, so we need a roll call vote. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay.
Aye.
Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Schultz.
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. The next item, item number 3, is second reading ordinance approving a pilot agreement with Montgomery Housing Partnership for 7667 Maple Avenue, Parkview Towers. Would somebody like to move the second?
I'd like to
reading?
move it.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Siemens, second by Councilmember Snipper. Any council comments on this second reading ordinance? Ms. Daines, did you want to say?
I just wanted to advise the council that based on the conversation at the first reading of the ordinance on the 22nd, the ordinance itself has been revised. It now includes a whereas clause that stipulates that Montgomery Housing Partnership has represented to the council that it will not request a renewal or an extension of the pilot agreement for the property from the city following expiration of the term of the 5-year pilot agreement approved by this ordinance. And we have also clarified when the pilot would actually go into effect, and that is in the section C after the now therefore be ordained. So it would go into effect July 1st, following at the beginning of the next levy year rather than possibly January 1st of this year. Other than that, there are no changes. The pilot itself has been reduced to a 5-year pilot, 50% abatement of the local property taxes, the city's taxes for the first 2 years, and a 25% abatement for years 3, 4, and 5. Total impact of that based on current tax levels would be $84,500 roughly, and half of the units would be set aside for individuals with incomes at 60% or less of the area median income. And that's roughly $62,000 for a family or household of four.
Thank you, and I think that was 83.5, not 84.5.
Yes.
Councilmember Robinson.
I was against this pilot at the beginning, and I'm still against it, but I'll probably vote for this because I know they're trying to provide affordable housing, and this is one avenue to do so. And but it got me thinking in a number of ways, and without carrying on much here, I'm going to contrast it a little bit with the way we enforce code violations on single-family homes. We look at our single-family homes and make sure they're up to snuff, and if they're not, we issue a citation. In this case, this large building has deteriorated to the point where another entity has to come in and provide and get a lot of funding and do large interior enhancements and redos, and for large buildings, it seems to me that we have the ability to, through the county, I'm going to back up 1 second, for our own housing, we in the city do code violation enforcement. For multifamily housing, we rely on the county to do our code violation enforcement, and that code violation enforcement has to do with the livability, if I can use that word, of individual units, which is fine and dandy. But there is nothing that looks at the structure of these buildings, as far as I can tell, to ensure that they remain intact and viable. And so where that can lead, as is the case here and in other places, is that the building itself degrades to the point where another entity has to come, and in this case and in other cases through the Montgomery Housing Partnership, come up with an intricate, creative, broad-reaching, investment-based solution to getting the multifamily housing back on the market. I'm thinking something is not resonating for me in this whole scenario, and I encourage us to look at this in the future and how we're handling multifamily units and the degradation of those multifamily units, what pushes them into that direction, and whether or not we're taking the right approach.
Ms. Daines, you looked like you wanted to add something.
I just would like to clarify that the property maintenance code that the county uses to do the inspections of rental properties in Tacoma Park under contract with the city is exactly the same property maintenance code that the city of Tacoma Park enforces for its owner-occupied residential properties, commercial properties, and institutional properties. The difference is that the county, because of the way our ordinance is structured, has the ability to go and do internal inspections as well as external inspections of multifamily licensed residential properties, whereas our code enforcement activities are limited to the exterior. Again, also just to clarify, and I believe Linda Walker may have advised you of this when we were at the first reading of the ordinance. If you look at the number of code violations that were identified for this particular property, if you just add them all up, it's a really big number. But if you take it on a per unit basis, it was basically 3 fairly non-life-threatening, in the grand scheme of things, minor code violations per residential unit or per apartment. And frankly, that's not bad when you're looking at doing inspections for multifamily residential properties, particularly one of this size. Admittedly, the systems have failed, or are in the process. The systems are such that their age is that it's not in a condition that's unfamiliar or unsimilar to other properties of similar ages in Tacoma Park. New Hampshire Towers, for example. Pinprick holes in the water systems, for example, is a common challenge that property owners of buildings of this age and size are faced with throughout the country, let alone in Tacoma Park. So just to clarify, it's exactly the same property maintenance code, exactly the same standards. They have authority under our ordinance to go in and apply to the interior of properties, whereas we do not.
the interior of the property is, in a multifamily unit, it would be necessary to go into the interior of the property to see the actual living unit.
Right.
In a single-family home, you can examine the living unit from the outside. It's not quite apples to apples, it seems to me, but I understand your point.
Yeah, it's both interior and exterior for
Yeah.
rental.
Thank you. Councilmember Wright.
I just wanted to make one friendly amendment to what's been proposed, or did we second in? Yes, we
Yeah.
did. Which is on that whereas at the top, just to be completely clear. I'm not a lawyer, but it does say, whereas Montgomery Housing Partnership has represented the council that it will not request a renewal or extension of the pilot agreement. I would like to have it say, it will not request a renewal or extension of the pilot agreement or any other pilot agreement for this property. Because technically, someone could be reading this later on and say, oh, they just meant not to renew at 50, 25, or to extend at 50 or 25, but we are saying that we don't want a pilot agreement of any kind on this property. So I would add, again, that we add in the language, or any other pilot agreement for the property from the city.
So request renewal or extension of this or any other pilot agreement?
Yep.
As the mover of this ordinance, I would accept that as a friendly amendment.
I had one other comment.
Okay. That's now a part of that. That was a
Great.
friendly amendment.
Which is not related to this, but to say we should go back to the previous agenda item and give city staff direction on their request about wanting information on whether they should spend time and money on a anti-begging or aggressive solicitation ordinance. So after we get...
Right. Sorry, I forgot about that.
Yep.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. Just like to follow up on Councilmember Robinson's comments. I think it could be helpful for this council to have a discussion of the code enforcement, and I, at this point, understand that and believe that the city and the county, on the city's behalf, are performing inspections as we desire. It's just, I think it would be, considering that some property owners have allowed rental properties to go into great disrepair, it would be beneficial for this council to have a discussion and maybe interview some experts in the field to see if there aren't additional measures that we could take in our inspections to keep property owners from sapping the revenues out of the property and not performing maintenance, and then dumping those properties on the market and putting us in the position where we either have to let the business go under or support the residents through actions such as this pilot. So I would just request that we add that item to the agenda next year. Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
Yeah, I want to follow up on the same question, if I may. It seems to me that while what we're hearing here is that on a large building like this, that was built in the 1960s, I guess. Is that correct, approximately?
Early 70s,
Early 70s, so it's about 40 years old.
mid-60s.
Okay. And it's been routinely inspected over the years, and there's been violations, and presumably they've been corrected over the time. And there's also just normal wear and tear, say on stairwells, elevators, the water systems, the heating and air conditioning systems. This stuff just gets old, and it wears out. A skilled property owner, or say one kind of property owner would say, well, I've depreciated a lot of this stuff, but these things need to be replaced because I want to maintain the value of my property. Whereas another property owner might say, well, I'm just not going to do that. And that seems to be a free choice of this particular property owner to have more or less let these systems get old and not restore them or replace them with modern equipment. And I guess it's frustrating to me to realize that we can have this kind of a situation. It seems to be occurring fully within, conformance with the housing code, but yet the building just sort of rots, to use a one-syllable word. And it comes to the situation like Councilman Siemens was referring to, where we're looking at this and thinking, my gosh, this thing's going to continue to get worse, and then we're sort of thinking, well, who is going to buy it, and who would want to buy it? And that puts us in the quandary, saying, well, gosh, we've got the Montgomery Housing Partnership, and maybe they're the only reasonable buyer for property that's been allowed to go to this extent. And I'm not making a recommendation here or saying, but just pointing out that it seems that the simple process of code enforcement doesn't really protect a building from gradual decay to the point where it virtually reaches a point of being uninhabitable. And that just doesn't, when you step back from it, it just doesn't make sense. I'm not sure what the solution to that is. If I had that kind of wisdom, you'd hear from me about it. But I just want to say that, because I think that's something that we need to think about. We've got a lot of these buildings in the city of Tacoma Park, and somehow or another, there's got to be some way, I would think, that we can discourage landlords from allowing their properties to more or less rot, or incentivize property owners to restore the infrastructures of these buildings. As I say, I don't know how this can be done, but I think it's something that needs to be explored.
I don't see any other council comments. Are there any public comments on this second reading ordinance approving a pilot agreement with MHP?
Hi, Barry Howard, 7607 Wildwood Drive. So I had a couple things. I was here last week and I heard the pilot discussion, and it sort of jarred my memory from about this time last year. And so I did a little research, and I just wanted to share with there was a comment about not forgetting about actually agreeing to enter into pilots with MHP and others. So right now, what I can tell from ordinance that are available online, there's about 10 current pilots. And so it's 719 to 721 Erie Avenue, 8624 to 8626 Flower Avenue, 1001 to 1005 University Boulevard, 641 Houston Avenue, 7401 New Hampshire Avenue, 8508 to 8510 Flower Avenue, 7610 Maple Avenue, 7513 Maple Avenue, and now 7667 is on the table. So my whereas clause and challenge to the council would be to look at all of the affordable housing programs that are going on at this moment right now, and see where they're aligned, and see what is the real benefit here. So we talked about money, or money was talked about last week. Sarah Gaines just reported tax benefit of almost $84,000. But what are the social benefits? I don't know if there's a social value index that we could say, okay, if we're going to invest, we're going to take the taxpayers, or deny the city this tax revenue for a certain period of time. We can do a calculation and figure out how much money we might forego in that time period. But what are those benefits? What are the social benefits? Can we put some sort of figure calculation on that and see what kind of benefits that society's getting back for those? So I think this issue should be studied. And in the meantime, perhaps a moratorium on any future pilots, since that we have quite a few now, and they seem to actually have been acted in a somewhat ad hoc manner. So I don't think there's a real strategic sort of vision for how these fit in with affordable housing programs. And I'd like that. I challenge the council to look into that issue. One other issue on this, I live in New Hampshire Gardens, and out of 389 single-family homes, 81 of those have registered rental facilities. And none of those people, to my knowledge, are eligible for a pilot, even though they might be in code violation in a couple of places. or they might need some money, some help. And I'm sure they would enjoy foregoing paying taxes for 10 years in order to fix up those rental units. So as a taxpayer of the city, I'm very concerned about these pilots and making these choices, especially in the current economic climate. Thank you.
And I would just make a brief comment or two in response. I think that council has become concerned about the trend in terms of pilots and how that relates to our overall affordable housing policy. One of the things that is different about the larger buildings that have gotten pilots, as opposed to the example of a single-family house, is that for the larger buildings, there have been part of the whole pilot structure has been to make sure that there are other agreements in place, usually in terms of the loan that goes on the building, that there be requirements for income qualification, so that it's kind of another way of providing affordable housing by having income qualified tenants, usually at 60% of, what's the phrase?
Area of median income, but it can vary significantly in that, depending on the deal that they make with the state, and they're also incurring that agreement for between 20 and 40 years.
Right. So there are some differences that don't make it an apples-to-apples discussion, but I agree that we've been concerned about how the overall strategy works. And Ms. Daines, can I just ask you real quick, do we have that many pilots in effect? I remember seeing the chart, and I thought it had, a number of those had finished or were about to finish. We don't have the chart in this week's packet.
The numbers seemed really high.
Yeah, it seemed high to me.
Those, I've got the ordinance numbers. They only go back to 2005, except for the one for Edinburgh House, and then the Washington Adventist Hospital and the Washington Adventist Hospital Nursing Home also have pilots. So there's actually more pilots than just
those expired.
Yeah.
I think some of those may have expired.
The ordinances are, so 7513 Maple is 2005-23. There's 3 properties, the Erie property, one of the flowers, 8624, and then the University Boulevard, which is Merrimack Gardens, is 2006-16. 641 Houston is 2006-44. Then there was 2 more in 2007, and there was an amendment to a Flower Avenue one. There was a continuation of the Edinburgh House, as well as
maybe if you could give that list to Ms. Daines, make sure that we didn't miss any in the
right. And
piece that we had.
there were a couple of pilot agreements that were authorized by the council by ordinance, but were never enacted because of changes in ownership or projects didn't go through.
Okay.
So I was surprised when you said 10 properties, or 10 pilot agreements, just for housing. I think it's less than that, but
If
we
you
can
look at,
verify that.
so-
Unfortunately, I don't have last week's.
I have
packet.
last week's in front of me because I looked it up on our wonderful
Thank
website
you.
that's going through, soon to be improved. In 2009 to 2010, for example, there are 6 properties. 7513 Maple Avenue, there's 8624, 8626 Flower Avenue, 101, 105 University Boulevard, 641 Houston Avenue, 8508, 8510 Flower Avenue, and 6710 Maple Avenue.
Right. There were a couple of pilot agreements that had been authorized by the council, but say, for example, I think New Hampshire Avenue was one of those that was being considered, but was pulled because of the change in the ownership for New Hampshire Towers.
Right. Yeah.
The
Okay.
sad thing about that property is that the Tacoma Overlook is right next door, and that's the only one, the only building, the condos, that has advertisement on the street. So people aren't even, and then, so the property where the rental properties are, because it's right near my place, where I live, where Councilmember Schultz lives as well, it's got chain link fences around it. They're still working on the outside. There's no signs out there trying to get new tenants in there, advertising the improvements that they've made in the property. And I think
You can't hear this on over the.
well, anyway, it's unfortunate. It doesn't seem, it's getting short shrift, even with the tax benefit.
Any other public comment? Seeing none, it's a second reading ordinance. Will clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay.
Aye.
Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Schultz.
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you, Councilmember Wright, for reminding me we wanted to make sure on the previous item that we had clear direction to the staff about whether we wanted the aggressive begging code to be drawn up, and there was some information on that about in terms of approximate cost. I thought we had indicated something when we had this before that we wanted to go that direction, but is that correct? Do people want to go there, to come back with the aggressive begging addition to the code to replace the struck part that we have to?
It's on the second, if you look at the very bottom section of the second page, the blue sheet on item number 2, it says that it will cost the city attorney approximately $825 to draft it. It does not include her time at the council meetings, but this would be to develop legislation prohibiting aggressive solicitation. I'm in favor of doing it.
Any questions? Anybody who doesn't want the city attorney to draft that?
This,
Where's that at?
Item number 2, back page.
I've already moved on.
Yep, you got to go back a second.
All right.
so this addresses, would narrowly address something defined as aggressive?
Yes, because we had to get rid of the begging.
Yeah, I understand.
And so other jurisdictions have had success instituting aggressive panhandling and aggressive solicitation, and it talks about ways that's defined and that we could do that as well.
Well, I guess then it begs the question is what constitutes aggressive?
Do you want them to draft?
As opposed to, say, assertive.
If you want them to draft it, we can have that discussion
Yeah.
at a later point. Yes.
Does having that discussion at a later point, then could we not vote on this now and get this done and add it? Or if we vote on this now, we eliminate some begging prescription, that's not the right word. And we're worried that people are going to flood the city with begging, or, I mean, is there a reason why we can't go with what we have and come back to it? It's an honest question.
I think that what the sheet says, we can't go with what we have because it's actually been considered unconstitutional by the courts.
Okay.
So if we want something, we have
to. Let's have the attorney.
So we want the constitutional one as opposed to the
Yes, let's have the
unconstitutional.
constitutional one, please.
Okay, so the answer is yes. Sorry about that blip. Next is item number 4, second reading ordinance amending Tacoma Park Code, Chapter 2.12, Administrative Regulations, Civil Service, and Collective Bargaining. Would somebody like to move the ordinance?
Move. Second.
I'll let the clerk figure out who moved that one. Okay. There were twin voices here. Council comments. Is that a leftover light or a new light?
both.
Okay. Councilmember Wright.
I understand that I'm in the minority here, but I still haven't seen any change that would suggest that we, for things that are significant for internal regulation changes, that we post that publicly. And so I'm going to vote against it because of that.
Other comments? Okay. Is there any public comment on this ordinance? Seeing none, it's a second reading ordinance. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Nay.
Councilmember Clay.
Aye.
Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Schultz.
Aye.
That carries 6-1. The next item is item 5, resolution providing for the city council's winter recess. We would go on recess starting tomorrow through January 2nd, return for council meeting on January 3rd. Would somebody like to move the resolution?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. And Then the last item in our special session is a resolution commenting on proposed state legislation. Ms. Ludlow, do you want to?
I guess I was expecting, sorry, comment period from the previous one. Yes, thank you. I have before you a draft resolution regarding a proposed state legislation by county bill MCPG 101-11 related to zoning text amendments and zoning map amendments. Each year, the county, there's state legislation that's proposed that either affects just Montgomery County or affects both Montgomery County and Prince George's County. It's traditionally important to us to look through those and see if any affect Tacoma Park or if there's a position that the council wishes to take related to these bills and then testify on them in public hearing. The bill that's before you is one that there's been some discussion about among you on email, and so I drafted a resolution responding to the issues that have been raised. The proposed bill would allow a referendum, to take place on a zoning text amendment or zoning map amendment in Montgomery County, and that's not something that Montgomery County has had in the past. The Tacoma Park City Council has a special role when it reviews zoning map amendments, zoning text amendments, or other major plans or actions. You make comments on them as part of your traditional review role, do a resolution, and Tacoma Park and Kensington both have a special provision in the state law that allows you to insist on a supermajority if a planning board or the district council, which is the county council when it reviews land use matters, would want to vote against what you're proposed, what you've agreed to on your resolution. So the information that's here, and I want to apologize, in the package, this was a late item on Wednesday, but just before the agenda went out, and there's a pursuant to blank on the sheet. So I believe passed out at your place is the one that lists the section of the state code that lists the information about Tacoma Park and Kensington and the supermajority requirement. The resolution that I have drafted indicates that a opportunity to take a zoning map or zoning text amendment to referendum would be a diminution of your authority to trigger a supermajority requirement by either the planning board or the county council, as your decision after some consideration could be overridden. I do want to mention that with zoning map and zoning text amendments, they're very complex, and people zone out. I don't know that they pick the names the same way, but most people don't really understand zoning.
Are you accusing us of zoning out? Is that what you're saying?
No, I said nothing. No, in fact, the opposite is true, and that is that city councils, planning boards, others who have had a chance to review things, get information from land use attorneys about what the different words mean and what implications they have, are able to make some wise decisions and recommendations related to matters within your jurisdiction. And that's not easily done by a regular citizen. And when you're dealing with development matters, there's often big money involved. I would have to say that this is a situation where it really is a power issue. And when there's an idea that, gee, I could get my hotel built over here if I just had a zoning text amendment that tweaks something, it's not something that many people might catch. And so I think it is important that there's some real eyes on what these amendments are and what the implications are. And for that reason, I think that it's a very good thing to have a city council, a planning board, a county council reviewing these and thinking about what the general county implications are. That's my view from working with zoning matters for all these 20 years. There is a draft resolution in front of you and for your consideration. I've also got comments on some other of the state bills, if you'd like.
I
Wanted-
move the ordinance.
Second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Council comments, Councilmember Robinson.
I know I'm going to be swimming upstream here. I'm in general a proponent of some form of direct democracy in the form of referenda and initiative. And I wish we had an easier way to get things on the ballot here in Tacoma Park. It's 10 times harder for us to get something on the ballot here than it is in Montgomery County due to a kind of a fluke in their rulemaking from some years past. And I also had the good fortune to sit with a county supervisor of southern Arizona a couple of weeks ago who told me a story of where this kind of a referenda option really served the people of that county. In his opinion, big money pushed through a development that the general populace did not want, and they mounted a referendum and defeated that development. I thought it was a good example of how a referenda could be used to good purpose. I know that zoning is difficult. I wish we had our own zoning. That's not going to happen anytime soon. I know that zoning text amendments are a particularly arcane and tricky business because they can occur, or they can apply to a specific part of the county as it relates to an overall zone, and there's also these sector plans, and it becomes very difficult. But I had a couple of questions for you, Suzanne.
Sure.
This would not take away our power to oppose something, if I'm right. It would not take away the requirement of the planning board or the county council to have a two-thirds supermajority
That's
to
correct.
overcome what we had said we wanted to happen.
Right, or that you didn't want to happen. Right.
Or that we didn't want to happen.
Correct.
But I'm a little unclear on how it would play out. I also want to make the note that would bring in line Montgomery County with all the other counties, or Montgomery and Prince George's with all the other counties in the state of Maryland. They already have that referenda option. That's how it was described to me. So, and I don't know if they've had abuse of this, or in somebody's mind, abuse of this through large sums of money being spent to overcome or push through a certain zoning issue. But how would it play out? Is it the case that somebody says, let's say, in the worst case, a developer says, let's put this zoning text amendment in place to allow my building or my set of buildings.
Right.
And then they
In
spend a
Tacoma
lot
Park.
of money.
In Tacoma Park.
In Tacoma Park.
That's what you're playing it on the worst-case scenario.
Right, okay.
So just to make sure it involves you.
Okay. In Tacoma Park, in an area that was a CR zone then? Would it be, or any zone?
Any zone.
apply to
Could be-
any-
it could be in a
Costco at
residential-
the Washington Adventist Hospital.
Okay.
It could
Costco.
it could be on your street.
Costco at the Washington Adventist Hospital, and they wanted to push through a special amendment that would make that happen.
Right.
And they get, would it be a requirement of 5% of the county of Montgomery County,
Yes,
notwithstanding what the citizens of Tacoma Park wanted?
that's correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So we would be forced to go along with what the county wanted in this case, even though it was in our city.
That could happen, yes.
That could happen. And would we have any ability to say no to that?
No.
No, if it was.
I mean,
so-
if that was as a decision of a referendum, no, that would be the final decision
Okay, so there's no supermajority or
of
okay
the
by
of the residents.
supermajority
No, there's
of
not.
any
There's not.
planning or anything like that could
No,
not.
it would simply be, if it's already gone through the planning board and the county council, and you guys have said, no, when the council agreed, no, the county council agreed, no, but then the referendum said, well, yes, we do want it, then against the wishes of you and the planning board and the district council, that could still go forward.
I see. Okay, well, that's a lot of ifs in a row. I'm still going to vote against it, but that's because and I know I'll be outvoted, but that's because I have a particularly warm spot in my heart for direct democracy in some form, not necessarily in grand scale, but in some form.
You have a strong stroke swimming that stream. Councilmember Schultz.
Thanks. I'd like to, referring to my experience and my background at working in the field of zoning, albeit a good number of years ago, but zoning is not high-tech. It's a very basic, fundamental process that cities have been involved with, going back to the early part of the last century, that's been upheld by the Supreme Court. As part of the municipalities' police powers or government's police powers, let me just say this, and that is that the value of a zoning text and a zoning map is that fundamentally it tells every property owner or would-be property owner what is permitted to happen in the future on their property or on adjacent properties near where they live, where they own property, or any of that sort of thing. And it enables people to be able, therefore, to predict the future. And to be able to predict the future in terms of land use is a way of protecting property values, so that if I buy a house on New Hampshire Avenue, because we have houses, single-family ones, I don't have to worry that in a couple of years somebody's going to come along and to build a gas station next door, and thus either ruin my property values or make it so valuable that I'm forced to sell it because other commercial people want to take it over and put up more gas stations. So my concern, of course, is that we have a process in the county by which changes to the zoning ordinance are permitted to be made, and to the zoning map as well. And this is why we have a planning commission and a county council and all the other pieces of this process put in place, and the process is extremely public one. It's designed to be allow for public hearing, a lot of public participation, a lot of public notices, and all of that, so that people can be aware of what changes are going to occur. If you allow something like a referendum, to me, the only people that are conceivably going to benefit from something like this are those that have the ability to generate a campaign to get a referendum established, get out and get the votes, and to do the advertising that's necessary to attract all the votes that they need to do. And who's going to do that but obviously large property owners or large developers or people that are interested in making significant changes in the zoning ordinance to their pecuniary benefit. So I think that this would be opening up a Pandora's box. Allowing a law like this would be an understatement, because basically it means, obviously the small property owner isn't going to have the opportunity to do this. Only the person who either has a lot of owns property or has an awful lot of money is going to be able to do this. And the average citizen has no need to do it, is no interested in doing it, and I think that, as you said, the vast majority of our citizens don't pay attention to the zoning ordinance because they don't have to, because they know that it is in place, that it isn't going to change without a lot of public notice and stuff like that, like we've had with the sector plans. The sector plan is a perfect example of what turns out to be a slow and tedious process to some people, but it effectively assures that what finally gets planned is planned in a way that most people are going to concur with. So I just think that this is a crazy idea to do this. It may be that it's being done in some other counties. I think it's something being able to petition would work in a very rural county where you might have the commission form of government and that sort of thing. But in an urban county or a county that is highly populated with 1 million people like Montgomery County is, it's not necessary. We have methodologies that work very nicely now. They are slow, but they're supposed to be slow. And so that's why I would say that this is something that I do not think that the city should support, this proposal. Thank you.
Councilmember Wright.
I defer to Councilmember Clay to speak first, because she's usually much more knowledgeable about zoning issues, and maybe I can just say ditto.
Me?
Yes.
I was actually going to say that I agree with everything that Councilmember Schultz just said. I think it's a great review, and the couple of things that I would add are that Montgomery County has found this important enough that they have added this two-thirds supermajority, and I think that that's relevant. The other thing that I would say is that if you think about the influence that developer dollars have had in electing county council members in this county, you can see why you would want to avoid a process in the instance of zoning where you would have a lot of developer interest and therefore developer dollars poured into a particular amendment, zoning text amendment. And the third thing that I'm going to say is that, because it's hammered into my head in planning school, but I never would support ballot box zoning. I don't think it's a good idea for all the reasons that have previously been outlined.
Councilmember Wright.
So I just have two questions. One, the referendum that they're proposing is binding. It's not like a it's, there's some referendums that are binding and some that are, what are they called, advisory or, right? So
The purpose here would be to be binding.
Binding. And who wants this exactly? Who's entered this legislation? Is it the delegations from both counties in totality and agreement?
No. One, Delegate Alcar submitted it. There were two reasons that I've heard. The first was that there was the issue was the Costco proposal at Wheaton Mall, which some of his constituents were concerned with. Nevertheless, that got resolved in the way that his constituents wanted. The other was the message that he gave to the mayor, which was that other counties have this. I will say that I'm not sure that all the other counties have that from some of the discussions I've held, but I don't know for sure. But those were the reasons given. There wasn't something else.
Thanks. I generally agree with Councilmember Clay and Councilmember Schultz on the points that they've made. I am respectful of Councilmember Robinson's point that in some cases that this could be used for a county for residents to rise up and oppose something. I think it's just a matter of kind of the costs and the benefits, and which is more likely to cause harm or derive benefit. And I think more likely to cause harm than to derive benefit, mainly because of developer dollars getting things onto referendum and then creating campaigns that don't make sense for people, but things get construed, There's advertising dollars associated with things, and we could end up with something that we don't want. So I'm going to vote in favor of the resolution.
And I'll just add that I'm also going to vote in favor of it. The supermajority that is required for Tacoma Park, it was characterized a few minutes ago as something that the county did for us. My sense is that, no, that's something we wanted and that we fought for.
That's right. I think the city of Tacoma Park actually had that before unification, and then and I'm not sure
fought
exactly.
to hang on to it through unification.
We did, and then since the time that took place, Kensington thought they wanted it too, and they've added into that same provision.
And I think that's a very powerful tool that we have, and I wouldn't want to do anything that diminished the power to try and make sure that we, as representatives of the residents of the city of Tacoma Park, have in trying to make sure that we represent those interests and that we get all the chance that we have to make our case, work it through the system, and have it prevail rather than have a potentially short-sighted effort overturn it, and there's nothing we can do about it.
I'd also like to just add that the supermajority language has been very useful as a threat. When there's been a particular issue, we'd say, look, we can't force a supermajority, and that has been very helpful in the past.
Any other council comment? Any public comment on this resolution?
Barry Howard, I just wanted to give a quick anecdote about the sector plan. So Councilmember Schultz brought it up a moment ago. There was actually an instance where citizens in my neighborhood were not supportive of a resolution, and I think it was Resolution 2009-44 that Councilmember Victoria brought up a year and a half ago during the summer. And that supported a CR zoning for the 7600 block of New Hampshire Avenue. And all of 100% of the neighbors that lived around that adjacent property were not supportive of that when I walked door to door and asked people. So this is an instance, just food for thought, this is an instance where there would not have been support for what the city put forward as a good idea and put forward this resolution in front of the Montgomery County Planning Board a week, less than a week, about 4 days after the resolution was passed, and where the residents were not supported. And so there was a letter writing campaign that went forward after that directly to the Montgomery County Planning Board, and that language is not in the current draft of the sector plan. Well, not the draft, it's the sector plan that's going to go before the county council sometime in 2011. So I just wanted to give an example where the residents, now this wasn't all of the residents, or the 18,000 residents of Tacoma Park, but is an instance where the view from the street was different from what the view of the day from the days was, and where there was public outcry and that was not supportive of a particular recommendation for zoning.
Thanks. Any other public comment? Okay. All those in favor of this resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
I believe that carries 6-1. And then we had another question, I think, about any other potential items that were, that are either, well, now the ones that are left are Montgomery County bills. My sense was that we might want to pose MC 1111, and maybe, Ms. Ludlow, if you just want to go through that real briefly.
Sure. MC 1111 is a bill that would grant the Montgomery County government exclusive authority to issue permits and enforce regulations and codes associated with the construction of school buildings. And apparently this is related to an ongoing dispute between the City of Rockville and MCPS. The City of Rockville, which has its own planning and zoning authority, denied a permit to Montgomery County Public Schools to put portables at one of its schools, citing that there wasn't adequate fire protection for that addition. The school district then went to the county trying to get county permits instead, and the county said it didn't have authority in the City of Rockville for that. So the school district is now taking this to the state to see if it can get the authority to just use Montgomery County. It would affect schools within the city of Tacoma Park if there was a permit that's stormwater, driveway, tree permits, the kinds of things that we do control, would not be able to be enforced in Tacoma Park. It would need to, if this went through, Montgomery County's permits instead, with Montgomery County standards, would be used for school construction.
So my sense was that we might want to oppose this as well, and that we could do that by letter. We don't need a resolution. We could send that letter into the county delegation. We could testify. It would mean me or somebody else going a second night next week to testify, since the...
Actually, it'd be the same night.
It would be the same night?
Yeah.
Same night, okay. So I could testify on this one as well on the 6th, since I'm going to be there on our alcohol bill.
That's right.
I could mention this one as well. Do they take them by number, or
You know,
I might have to stick around? I don't know. But we could oppose it and I could work out the logistics of how they get the opposition, whether it's only in writing, whether it's spoken testimony, if people are in agreement on that. So, does anybody think we should not oppose that bill? Okay, so we will oppose that bill and work up the appropriate language to convey that to the delegation.
Okay. Is that it?
Anybody got any other ones that they wanted to have us take an action on? Okay, seeing none, we're finished with that item. We're finished with the special session. We'll take a short break, and we'll come back for our 2 work session discussion items. We will come back at 8:38. We took a few extra minutes to set up some accommodations for the task force members who are here. And I think what we're going to do first is finish going through the last of the high priority recommendations from the task force staff recommendations, and where we're starting in this week's packet, if you're looking at page numbers, is page 21. That's the transportation section. We had gotten as far as the beginning of the transportation section. So we've got just a couple of high priority recommendations from that section to go through, and then we will hear from the committee and continue the discussion. So, good timing.
I think as the mayor indicated, we were going to start with the transportation section. The first high priority recommendation made by the task force was to adopt a charrette traffic flow design for Tacoma Junction. Staff really did not have an opinion on this other than to note that the council recently appointed a Tacoma Junction task force to consider this and other issues. There also had been some prior discussion of this suggestion, and there was some opposition expressed in certain segments of the community. And the only other staff comment was just that simply SHA would have to be an integral part of any discussion of this matter.
And when does the Tacoma Junction Task Force, when does it envision that they come back?
Yeah, I believe they were initially appointed for a year, and that would be next fall.
Okay.
The other recommendation of the task force under the transportation section that was deemed to be high priority was working with SHA to recalibrate stoplights to keep traffic flowing. As noted in the staff comments, this has been done from time to time with little improvement, but certainly, with the council's direction, staff can follow up with SHA once again on this matter.
There's another point to note on the traffic light situation in the city. We are the only jurisdiction in Montgomery County whose traffic lights are managed by State Highway. All other traffic lights are managed by the county. So we're the exception to the rule, and as that, it also makes it more difficult to get State Highway's attention to the traffic signals. Part of the reason for that is because of the technology and the age of the traffic signals themselves. They have to be upgraded and changed before Montgomery County will accept them into their system. And because they're not an infrastructure that the city has been responsible for, we rely on State Highway to do that upgrade. They haven't funded that upgrade. So as a result, we're kind of in this catch-22 where we can't get integrated into the Montgomery County system until the traffic lights get upgraded. Now, I don't know, because we haven't dealt with it, whether that would be better or worse. But it's just a point of interest. It is a little bit of an anomaly.
And it was, I'm not sure I'll represent this totally accurately, but I would say it was 10 years ago that I think it was the Montgomery County traffic engineers told then Mayor Porter and myself that that was all going to happen, and that at that point it was Rockville's traffic lights and Tacoma Park's traffic lights, and that those were all going to be integrated into the county system. At that point, I think they said within a year and a half. And so you're saying now the issue is the state has done Rockville, but they haven't done Tacoma Park, and the issue is funding to get the upgraded infrastructure to deal with the lights before the county will take them.
That's my understanding.
Councilmember Wright and Robinson have lights on. Do you want to do something now, or?
I just wanted to clarify, so in places like Rockville and Gaithersburg, it's run by the county, even though it's in...
They're integrated into the county's electronic traffic control system.
And have we had any discussions with our state delegation about what the state highway would need to do these upgrades?
I know Suzanne Ludlow has been the point person on that, and she may have some updates. She's had the conversations with the county and the state.
And I had a clarification question. Specifically, is this New Hampshire Avenue and Piney Branch? Is that
And Carroll Avenue.
And Carroll.
And Flower Avenue.
Okay. I'm trying to think of where the stop lights are, and on Carroll, there's the junction.
At the junction.
The next one is on
Philadelphia.
University. Flower, that's right. So it would be getting through without having to stop, trying to ensure that you got through. Flower, Carroll, University a little bit, New Hampshire.
And Ethan Allen.
Ethan Allen. If you could ever get, it takes so long to get from one stoplight to the next on Ethan Allen. I don't know that there's any, but I take, okay, thank you.
And the point of that was to integrate it into their whole traffic management system, make it so that if the buses were behind, they could make changes through that system. It's a whole monitoring system at the Emergency and Transportation Center up county, where everything gets coordinated through one center.
My understanding is it's also maintenance. Right now, our maintenance comes out of Baltimore, the SHA office in Baltimore.
There's a stop light that's been, looks like it's been going in at Philadelphia, at 410 in New Hampshire. It looks like it's been in progress for months. Do you have any notion of that?
This is a traffic light or a pedestrian signal?
Traffic light. There's new poles that go across and...
As part of their renovation of New Hampshire Avenue, they're putting in new traffic, whatever they call that traffic structure, the poles themselves.
Traffic structure, yeah.
So maybe that New Hampshire isn't the issue, the rest of it is.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think about whether we want to, if there's any more questions about that item, so that we've finished with it and then go on to the next one. I just wanted to say about the traffic flow improvements, my recommendation of late to, in this case, State Highway, would be to see if they wanted to undertake a pilot to turn all the junction lights to flashing red, and see if they can see their way to doing that. I'd bet that traffic would flow a whole lot better and everybody would be a lot happier.
I'm in favor of a test run like that.
Trouble is, every time we make a request to try and do something to help traffic in the junction, however it turns out, it always makes it worse instead of better, because it's not what it's like, be careful what you ask for, you may not get it, and then you may be really unhappy, and we've had that experience.
Does anybody in the state of Maryland know what to do when they come to a flashing red four-way stop?
You're supposed to speed up.
Yes, apparently.
Speed up and slow down.
The next last section of the report had to do with waste-related issues, and the first one was to pursue a public-private partnership for household organic waste collection. In the original report that is included in the packet, staff had recommended that this recommendation be deferred until processing options could become available. Since when we started this process and until tonight, there has been kind of an update on that. There is a memo included in your packet outlining some research that Daryl has done, and I'll turn it over to her. She can kind of update everyone on that.
Sure.
And that's the salmon sheet?
Yeah, I don't know what it's on, but...
It's a memo from me dated November 23rd. I believe it was salmon last week, Mayor Williams, and it's now
Maybe this is last
regular white
week's.
paper.
This is last week's.
It was passed out last week as an additional information, but it is included in the packet this week.
Okay.
As with most recycling programs, the key is the market. If you don't have a place to process it and market it, you can't complete the cycle. So as when we started our recycling program, we started by identifying the market and the place that would process our recyclables. The same is true of any additional program, be it organics or textiles or any of the other things that are potentially available for us to generate programs around. And the market or processing options have been scarce in our area. A few facilities have come and gone, and I was recently made aware of a facility in Howard County, Recycle Green Industries. They're actually licensed for wood waste and soil processing, though through Howard County they also have permission to integrate food waste composting with their operation. So I went up and took a tour. It's a 30-acre facility about 45 miles away, which makes it a little outside of the distance that you'd normally want to travel for processing, but within the range of possibilities. So we'll continue discussions with them. It just opens up an option, providing they stay in business, and they have been in business for 7 years. So at this point, don't have any serious concern that they may disappear. They're an organization that's been up and operating, providing their permit status or their licensing status doesn't change, and they're still allowed to add food waste with their yard waste processing. It's potentially something we might want to explore on a pilot basis. As you know, from a couple of weeks ago, we're about to replace our 2 trash trucks. We have 2 existing trash trucks that we're retiring. A vehicle like that could be put into use for a curbside collection program if we wanted to start a pilot-type program. The other option, of course, with this, and in my mind, in some ways, it's preferable, is to increase and provide incentives or opportunities for people to do food waste composting in their own backyards, so the least transportation, the least need for additional public service or support. If you can handle it at home, it's, in my opinion, best to handle it at home. But in the cases where there's council interest in this, and I think there would be community support, we may be able to establish a pilot. Now, having said that, we don't really know yet what type of collection frequency we would have, whether we'd offer it year-round or just in certain seasons. We're taking a look at some of the programs that exist in other municipalities around the country, their collection containers, their vehicle types, their collection options. I doubt this would be a program that would work very well for drop-off. Not many people are going to want to come and bring their food waste to a drop-off location. So it's one of those things that you either have to compost in your backyard or collect at the curb. So it's potentially a viable option for a pilot. Different kind of pilot than you've been discussing earlier, not to confuse the terms.
And I just want to make sure that I heard you correctly. When you were talking about the 2 new trash trucks replacing the old ones, were you talking about potentially having one of the current about to be replaced trucks that might be available, because we would have like backup trucks, and that it might be available for that use?
It potentially could, because it wouldn't be having the kind of load and compaction needs. You don't need compaction when you're doing food waste collection, and ostensibly it would be on a much smaller scale. So a lot of the mechanisms, are worn out in terms of the compaction of the truck itself. That's not technology we would need in this type of collection. We'd need to just have a vehicle that could make it from point A to point B and back again.
Okay. Councilmember Clay?
Well, presumably the vehicle should be watertight. I mean, essentially, it's going to be sloppy. When you do this kind of thing, is it all food waste or just vegetable matter?
A lot of programs mix yard waste and food waste together.
But all food waste, so...
No meat.
Yeah, okay. So people would have to get used to sorting...
No animal products, yeah.
No animal products. Okay, thank you.
Some include things like paper towels, things like that.
Right.
It could include paper towels?
So a lot of it, is driven by the processor themselves, what they'll accept and what they want to manage.
Can we ask the task force a question on any of these particular items?
Sure.
Or do we? Just because I wonder if there's an opinion about, there's kind of a trade-off, right? We could do more of a campaign and provide resources for people to do the composting in their backyard versus trying to launch a pilot. I think there's some ways we could streamline it where you might have volunteers on blocks or houses put out a particular can and people could put their stuff in there once a week or something and make it easier for the Public Works Department. But do you guys have a perspective on one versus the other, whether we should deploy our resources in one way versus the other on this issue?
I think I would want to get the input of Leandra, who was the expert on this issue. I think in a lot of ways it depends on which way you want to go. If you want to do just food waste, you want to think about what would be the costs and benefits of that for a facility that's 40 miles out. But if you could expand it to all organics, then you really limit the amount of trash that you have. And that may make it more attractive as an option. But I would ask Leandra, and again, with each of these, generally we had one or two people, maybe 3 or 4, who were experts on that, and I would want to defer back to them to say, what do you think about this or that?
I have just a personal comment. I've lived in Tacoma Park for 25 years. I've composted all my food waste, vegetative food waste, for the whole time I've been here, never thrown any of it away. So I know it can be done. It does take a little bit of, you got to monitor it, but it's, I think, trying to do something on site would make sense. I was just telling Darrell, I'm going on my 3rd year of taking all the leaves from my backyard and composting them on site as well. But it's, this doesn't take care of multifamilies, but, anybody who's ambitious enough certainly can do it.
So, from my understanding, there are municipalities that compost everything, meat products as well as vegetable products, including non-meat paper towels and tea bags and things like that. I think Portland is way ahead of a lot of other people. Did you find that in your research?
Sure.
And they have, I know that we have locally one of the national experts on this, Brenda Platt, who works for the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. She's about 2 blocks from here. And she'd be the one to talk to. I know that she's working with people on the state level to bring a facility in, or a county level to bring a facility into Montgomery County, because it is, as we mentioned in our report, could be potentially a moneymaker once you get the whole thing going. There is a facility that she's looking at in Delaware that is, I think it's called Peninsula Compost in Wilmington, that's interested in starting a second operation down here potentially. We have a big problem with zoning regulations in this county, from what I understand, some really mismatched composting regulations that apply inappropriately or kind of haphazardly to small family farms or small farms versus bigger situations in the, you probably know all about it. I only know peripherally that there's issues that we have to resolve at a bigger level than Tacoma Park potentially, or I don't know exactly how Tacoma Park can deal with it in the bigger context. But I don't know if you've talked to Brenda, but Brenda knows these things cold. She'd be a good person just to have a conversation with about how to facilitate that. There's also software, a website-based software that facilitates, even before you talk about compost, there's extraordinary waste on an edible food level. And so it facilitates edible food, pre-compost, if you will, getting to people who can actually eat it rather than composting it. And so there's online software that they're talking about bringing in locally so that we can facilitate that. Certainly, I know that's advancing in D.C., and we could potentially get it here. We don't have the number of restaurants and other, stores that have that size waste, but we could probably benefit from that as well.
Lastly, the Council of Governments has a food waste composting task force that's been working with the recycling committee on this issue.
And they're the ones bringing that.
Yeah,
piece
Brenda's
in.
involved in that.
Yep.
So it sounds like there's some, I'm trying to figure out the best pun to use, fruit, but I
I
won't
think
go
there's
there.
a lot of interest.
Fruitful.
There's a lot of interest. The issue is there is not the processing yet. And there's a few hurdles to get it in place, but, we know what we have in place right now.
One potential proposal might be, since there is this facility and we have the trucks, is to actually do a pilot in a neighborhood, and that, I think, would help us if the facility becomes available more locally and maybe takes more stuff. We would have learned stuff in the process about how we actually collect it locally, so that when the facility is available more closer in Montgomery County, that we would be more prepared to move forward to something like this.
You could learn a lot about your generation rates and things like that. Containers that work or don't work.
You have a question?
Yeah, it seems, to respond to Councilmember Wright, it seems like by doing a pilot, one advantage would be to incentivize the entrepreneurial side of our community somewhere out there to sort of say, there's a future in this, it looks like it, so you start to get a little symbiosis here, because if nobody's trying to experiment with it, then there's not as much incentive for people to try to come up with a composting facility. A couple of questions that I was curious about. I know that we have 3 public schools, and schools are notorious for generating a huge amount of wasted food in the cafeterias, because kids get these things, and my wife worked in schools, many for 35 years, and the food that goes to waste is appalling. Plus, you have the hospital, who knows for how long, but I'm sure that generates a tremendous amount of food waste. I'm wondering if those could be included, one or more of those institutions, in a pilot. My other question is what is the final product of all of this? I mean, when you succeed in, this is just an open-ended question based on my ignorance. When all this gets done and you've composted this food waste through some facility, what is the out product? Dirt.
Really good dirt.
Yeah,
Really good
very
dirt.
rich
So-
organic material that you can use to supplement your soils.
Which can be sold.
Mm-hmm.
But it's important that you use a facility that's operating appropriately, or else you don't get really good dirt.
Councilmember Schultz brings up a really good option. There's another option that I'm not sure that has been talked about, and that is using the cafeteria waste from facilities like restaurants and the hospital and colleges and schools. And there's an Indian tribe that has they've developed a partnership with what they call a piggery, which is basically a pork farm. And they would take all of the food waste from the casino operations and put them in metal barrels, seal them with plastic wrap and duct tape, ship them to the pig farm. The farmer would take the top off and boil it, basically cook the waste, which would kill all the germs and everything, feed it to the pigs. So there your product is pork.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a number of other options around here. I don't know how many pork farms we have in Montgomery County or close by. And I also know that some of the restaurants in Old Town were at least thinking about looking into reusing some of their food waste in some way. So
Cool.
there are ideas out there and models.
I'm tempted to say this was a fascinating discussion on this particular topic. We have a few more to do, and we have the chance for the task force to tell us which among these they think are the highest priorities for us to look at. So I don't want to get too bogged down in too many details on these things and not get through and have the task force have a chance to give us input. So if we have questions, let's do them, but let's try and get through this expeditiously so that the task force can basically tell us directly what you think our priorities are. We can react to it, and we can hopefully come up with some priorities tonight instead of just saying, oops, let's continue this. We had a fascinating discussion, but we've got more to do. Maybe that's going to be the end result, but let's at least try.
The last recommendation that was included as high priority was implementing a rewards for recycling program. As noted in the staff comments, I think there has been discussions of this concept over the years, and I'm going to defer to Daryl because I think she has firsthand familiarity with what has been discussed in the past.
Yeah. In general, this issue has come before the council on 2 different occasions. One, a pilot that was going to be funded by Montgomery County that was rejected by the city to pursue, and then city staff brought it forward again, I think as part of a budget discussion in the past. I think, some of the issues that were raised at the time, and again, I'm not saying that they're right or wrong, but some of the concerns that inhibited it from moving forward in the past was a concern about the impact of this on the larger waste generators. Basically, if you generate a lot, the more waste you generate, the higher your cost is. And so for large families or large intergenerational families, there may be a higher burden for them. And that was one of the large concerns that the city had, or the council had, each time this issue has come up before. A lot of the technical issues as to how to do it, whether you use a bag or a tag or a meter or a scan bar, there's lots of technology available. So clearly it's in place, it's been done, we can do it. There will be some operating costs to start out with, depending on which way we go. At times in the past, this was also coupled with a trash toter type of situation where the city would provide or sell a certain size container, and that would set the rate schedule. And what was envisioned there is you pay for your trash and not for your recycling. So the more you put in the recycling container, the lighter and the lesser and the smaller trash container you need. So that, I think the second time around, that was being discussed as the mechanism whereby we'd set the rates. This is a type of program that's generally established with some support from firms that set up these programs. However, we've got pretty intimate knowledge of our waste generation in the city, and I don't think we'd need a whole lot of technical support to start up a program, though we may want to run some of the financing schedules through firms that do this on a regular basis to make sure that we are capturing the costs and have a system that's going to work. And then, if the council wants to pursue this, we'll have lots of discussions about whether that's tags or bags or containers or how it is that we'd implement that type of fee. In tandem with this, that the council may want to consider is establishing a kind of a dedicated solid waste fee. So basically everything related to trash recycling programs in the city of Tacoma Park is self-funded and paid for itself. So you establish it kind of like how we did with the stormwater fee. All the costs are included in one fee category or one budget category, and then the revenue that's required to generate that program is apportioned to the participants. So, that could be a tandem type of idea that you have with something like this. Once you establish it, you create a self-contained, self-supporting fund.
And I've got one quick comment on the second iteration of the past council discussion that involved toters. My recollection is that a lot of the issues around that particular aspect revolved around the usability of the toters in a very hilly jurisdiction where there isn't much space adjacent to the road to put them, where they get set out and kind of blocking things, but they tended to be on wheels and they can take off down the street. And it was those kinds of issues that were a big part of that conversation in terms of rejecting that at that point. Councilmember Clay.
So I've always thought that this was a good idea, and I've always thought that the toters are a good idea, although I've commented that. My question is about tax lines, because I think your idea about having a dedicated revenue stream and cost center is great. But we're limited on the number of tax lanes on the tax bill. So my first question is, because remember this came up before, the county will only collect on so many lines. Are we out of lines? Would we have to bill for this ourselves separately?
Probably would need to talk to Yvonne about that. Because I think there are some limits. That's why when we have to collect any kind of delinquent fees, it tends to just be noted on the county tax bills as a Tacoma Park special. But we could certainly explore that with the county. And as you indicated, Councilmember Clay, the other alternative is that oftentimes when you have an enterprise fund, and I happen to work in a city that had sanitation as one, and since I left, they actually went to a pay-as-you-throw system. They had other utilities, so they did bill directly. We do bill for our own stormwater, so it's not inconceivable that the city could just, simply bill the sanitation fee separate and apart from the tax bills.
But possibly at the same time that you build the stormwater.
Possibly. The databases may be a little bit different, mainly because multifamily buildings are going to pay a stormwater fee but have options of getting their trash service from elsewhere in the city, at least under the current code provisions.
Okay. Other comment is about the toters. Just park it like a motorcycle and turn it sideways. Solve that problem. But so the other thing I remember about the toters is that sometimes they require the big mechanisms. And I lived in a city in Brea where they put a nice new paved street in, like, must have been a 50-foot wide street in front of my little house. And then the trash trucks got converted, and then we had big ruts in the road in front of our house, and then they had to resurface. So I'm looking at the pictures of the nice trash toters that you put in here, which look very familiar to me, and thinking about the big
Yeah, our trucks currently, we purchase them with toters, because we've been selling, I won't call them toters because that's a brand name, but we've been selling trash carts for 6-7 years. So we sell 60 and 90-gallon trash carts, and we have the collection equipment on our trucks to pick it up. So we're equipped to do it, and we also pick up dumpsters.
I'm going to buy one. Quit replacing my trash
We
cans
sell
every
them
6 months.
at cost. Don't know off the top of my head, $40 or $50 for a container. We have to charge what we paid for them plus a tax to the ones that we sell.
Thank you.
So, yeah, we've got them in place.
And Councilmember Clay, the issue wasn't just like a motorcycle, because it was two hills. It was the hill that you're on and the hill of the area, the planting strip or the driveway apron or whatever it is, which we've come a cropper with on ADA compliance on sidewalks. Councilmember Wright, you have a question.
Just a couple, a question and a comment. So we could also potentially apply, if it was a separate fund, it might be easier to make the case for applying for grant money for doing something innovative like this, potentially. Do you think that's true? Are there grants out there that you've heard around?
I don't know. We haven't explored that. I know, government grants is a fairly specific kind of thing. Since the programs exist elsewhere, I don't know if anybody's facilitating the creation of programs anymore. I mean, 10 years ago probably so, maybe less so now.
So, and then my comment is, I'm a fan of doing this, and I know Joe's not here, Joe Edgell's not here, but the one about the rolling down the hills kind of strikes me as like finding a reason not to do it. And
I was just relaying what the conversation was.
I know, but my point is more like that. I think shouldn't be the thing that stops us. There's probably a solution to that associated with like modifying the toters in some way. I don't know, or maybe that those few people don't have wheels on their toters, or I don't know what the solution is. But there's got to be a.
The solution is square wheels.
Yeah, the component of that discussion was also whether the city would provide them or whether people would have to purchase them. And if the city were to provide them, it's a substantial expenditure, and you have maintenance and replacement as well. But in a third to a third, $300,000 dollars to set up a program, just to purchase enough containers for the city.
And amortize that over the course.
But if the city doesn't provide them, like, I remember when we lived in Oakland, this was the first time they did this, and it was actually the first time I really engaged in reducing the trash out of my house, and the trash fee was the motivator, but the city provided the can, and so if I'd had to buy the can, I probably would have waited longer before I reduced my trash can, because as soon as I got it, essentially, I just called them and ordered a smaller can after I figured it out, and they reduced my bill immediately, and they came and delivered a smaller can. So I think that that's probably part of being successful at getting people to reduce their waste costs.
Well, potentially those costs could be borne by the users of the program, so you finance it over time, and eventually it covers itself in the utility fee.
Next. That's it? We reached the end?
We have reached the end.
You're right. Okay. I want to give the task force members a chance to tell us what you think. Give us priorities, whatever it is. Organize yourselves, decide who speaks, whatever you want to do.
Well, I think Steve Davies was a co-chair with Joe Edgell, who unfortunately can't be here tonight. If he were, I know he would say, look to Tacoma, Washington, because they were doing this same thing with the containers, the trash containers. I think the priorities are in the report. I mean, we worked hard to winnow the number of priorities we had down to the, what do we call them, high priority recommendations. So that was our effort to prioritize.
I guess I would ask if there's a priority within the priorities.
I would bet you that each of us could probably come up with our own personal predilections or well-reasoned arguments or analyses for why we think we should do one thing or the other. Personally, I mean, I think you know what I think. A seasonal ban on gas-powered leaf blowers would be a good place to start. I brought along a little chart.
Showing the air quality index for April through
October. I thank my son Henry and daughter Gwen for helping to color this. But from 2009 to 2010, I think you can see yellow being moderate air quality, orange unhealthy for sensitive groups. In 2009, we had 4 orange days. 2010, we had 32. We also had 3 red days, unhealthy for anybody, basically, very unhealthy. I got this all off the mwcog.org website. And I just wonder when anyone, any municipality that belongs to COG, is ever going to really do anything about air quality. I just, this is ozone plus particulate matter 2.5 microns. It's unhealthy. So that's why I've been going after the leaf blowers and lawn care equipment. Obviously, there are many sources of pollution, but they're fairly high on the list, again, according to COG. So, that's one. And that's also why I felt that, we should go after people who sit in front of the post office and leave their engines running while they sit there and text. I know enforcement's always an issue, but I think taking some action actually would be tantamount to educating people.
If you want to
laying down a marker.
Get back to the microphone.
Oh, okay. I'm done.
Okay.
I think each of us would have different views on how to move forward, but I think we would want you to move forward. I think there's some issues that have been raised and reviewed by staff, and yeah, we can go ahead and do this. And in some cases, they've already done it. So in some, there's minor barriers, such as, well, we need to get permission from state highway in order to plant trees in the middle. Well, that's a couple of phone calls, maybe. In other cases, there's public education. Well, it may be hard for the staff to put on a workshop on their own, but if they ask for volunteers to help them staff that and do public outreach and maybe invite some other people to do presentations, that's something that could be done fairly easily. I feel a little sad that I think we've kind of lost the opportunity on, or at least a good part of the opportunity for the energy efficiency workshops, because the federal tax dollars, tax credits are at least expiring at the end of December, so there's not the time now to be able to put one on and allow people to take advantage of that because of the education that they may get at our workshop. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it, but I feel we've kind of lost a bit of an opportunity there, something that we could have done over the summer, and it could have had a big impact in the fall for people who have not yet done enough energy efficiency to be able to take advantage of that credit. I don't know what to tell you to do. I don't think there's any magic bullet in terms of what you pick to go forward. But I really, really hope that council does pick at least a few things, goes forward with them, whether they're big things, small things, medium things, or a mix of them. And also to think about funding that you may be able to get. I know it just occurred to me that a year ago I was spending every waking minute and some of my sleeping minutes writing a grant. And I think we came out of there with the knowledge that we really need somebody on staff who can write grants, grant proposals, so that the city can get outside funding when it's available for doing innovative things.
I'll follow up with what Catherine was saying, basically, that we're not looking to sort of say which one or two items out of this whole report should be done. I see that kind of being the ball kicked back to us, and I'll kick it right back again, saying we wrote the report for you to do a lot of these things in parallel, or as much as you can, because there's not one or two things that you need to prioritize over another when they can be done at the same time.
I'll jump in because hopefully I'll comment some more later with my more extensive comments. My priorities, notably, are in energy and climate change, carbon emissions, as those are my personal and professional advocacy realms. Specifically, green building improvements. I think it's a very opportune place to get both cost savings and energy savings. We need to make sure to involve the rental community, which is significant in the city, so I'll highlight those items. I think we need to focus on some of the revenue-generating options, such as saving the money through the streetlights program. I know it's somewhat of an unknown to purchase the streetlights, but it looks like one of the most promising money-saving endeavors, which could fund future efforts. The third priority would be to make sure we're doing a carbon inventory every year, or every couple of years, so we know where we're going on stuff and what's being effective, what's not. But the biggest thing is we just need to pick something. Let's set a budget. Let's allocate $25,000 or $50,000 and just have something to work with. Pick a couple items and start working on them, and move forward. Because I find we're just trying to work within constraints here. And we're certainly not going to be a leader, and I don't even know if we can be a follower on some of the great things other people are doing if we can't be a little stronger in either our restrictions or our bans or the money that we allocate to these efforts.
Okay, I'll chip in too. I do have real priorities, and I'll come out front and say them. I think it's a reminder about why we're doing this. We're doing this to address climate change. I know that among our task force, we had a discussion about whether climate change includes all environmental issues, or all environmental issues were included when you address climate change. But I think the real substance is, as Sach even said, to acknowledge that either money or people's time, right, either money or time, has to be thrown at this if we're serious about actually addressing anything about reducing our carbon emissions. And at this point, there are proven technologies or proven things that cities have done that we can also do. We clearly don't have the finances or potentially the will or the will and the finances or whatever it is. We're not ready to be a leader on a lot of these issues, but we can certainly do some of the things that are out there. Maybe they're not broadly out there, but they're out there in pockets that we can implement in the city. And I think that, technical advice is not, to me, a barrier. It was listed as a barrier in a lot of places. It is something like a rolling cart that we could address, right? And so I think that we need the inventory to know where we're at. We need to set goals. Otherwise, we have no idea what we've accomplished. That's clear from what we're doing, because we've redone the work of 10 years ago in this task force. I'm hoping that the next time somebody does this, because hopefully there will be a next time, there will be significant changes passing what was done over the last 10 years. And so I would really advocate, whether it's 25 grand, 50 grand, whether we apply, I don't know how we get the money, is it taxes or grants, or cut it out of something that's happening in Tacoma Park right now, but say we really want to make a change on this issue of climate change, and we're going to do it, or allocate some staff time to taking on a consistent approach to some of these recommendations. Because otherwise, we all know, if there's not a person's name on it and there's not a budget, it ain't happening. And so that's really what would make me feel like I haven't wasted my time coming to committee meetings on something that I really care about, and I know you all care about. So it would be really great in that way to say, no, we really want to do something, our piece in Tacoma Park, about climate and carbon emissions. And for me, that would be, staff time actually beats anything hands down for me. I'm the one who was harping the whole time on the overarching, making sure that there's a staff person. And I wanted 3 staff people. But one would be good, or a half-time person would be good, something significant that shows the commitment of the community.
Hey, I just wanted to ask, what do you think is the easiest one to get started from your viewpoint? In other words, is there any one that you guys view that, hey, we can get this one done easily and fast? Any thoughts?
I see a light up. Okay. I don't know. Councilmember Clay. Was that light on to answer that one, or was that something else?
No, but I actually think there's several things that we could implement immediately, both from the high priority and the low priority. I don't think it should be that difficult to get the state to cooperate. Some things we talked about tonight. I don't think it should be that difficult to get the state to cooperate on, timing the lights. I've seen them out there to retime the lights. We've called them and complained when we were worried about the kids who didn't have enough time to cross from essentially the co-op over to where the postal center and Glad Rags used to be. And I saw them later out working on the lights. So I think that's possible, and I think it's possible to do the tree lighting. And I don't want to go through everything that's here, but just from the things that we talked about tonight, I don't think it would be that difficult for the city to do the fee for waste disposal, which I think it could make a big difference. I know that certainly in my life, I found having to pay for my trash can when I was going to college was a significant motivator for me, and I got a free composting bin from the city and learned how to use it and learned that I couldn't put meat in it. So I think that those are basic changes that would change the way that people live. The reason why I posted why I turned on my little light was to ask if you, it's Nadine, right? It's okay. I can barely see right now. My eyes really bothering me. You were speaking specifically about the greenhouse gas emission piece, and I think it's a challenge. I wouldn't want. I would like to do that. I wouldn't want to do it without also having kind of the meaningful backup for the things. The reason why I turned on my light was that I wanted to ask. There's a lot of instances where things are financed under public-private partnership. And tonight we talked about, I think waste was one, and street lights was one, and green power is in here as one. I don't know how many others there are. So the question that I would ask, since you guys I think formulated this and could uniquely answer this, is if several of the things in public-private partnership pay for themselves, and if a private entity is willing to invest in it, is it not worthwhile for the community to invest in it and recapture the savings? So I guess, so I would ask, that. And then of these things, some things I feel like we really make money on. Like, we know if we bought the streetlights, we would save something like 50%. I know that there are some barriers to that, but we would save 50% on the energy and things like that. And so we have some kind of concrete numbers. I don't feel as confident about the public-private partnership around the waste issue, because clearly there's different sets of barriers and not everything is in place. So could you speak to that a little bit, and the use of public-private partnership? And is it just because we don't want to put forward money? Like, it seems to me like you could bond for an investment in this, where you could use the proceeds of the bond to pay things off. Of course, you would only want to do that, like I said, where you really knew what was going to pay for itself. So that was my question, but I don't want to interrupt to the throwback if other council members want to answer.
Maybe we can get a
what they would do
couple
first.
more responses, and then you all make a couple notes and come back at us with, we send your way. Councilmember Sniffer.
I was not going to comment on a particular item. I have a whole
So
other-
come back to you.
Come back to you.
Okay. Anybody got particular?
This is a particular question, is that what we're talking about? Is that where we are?
There was the question about, what's the...
What do we want?
What one thing? And so if somebody has an answer to that?
I'm more along, I'm kind of a Councilmember Clay. I've got my kind of list of things I'd like to see done. When we get to that, I'll have to weigh in.
Okay.
I'd like to, first of all, I want to say I think that the report is a terrific report, and I want to be really clear about that. It's terrific in two senses. It's full of great ideas, which is what we wanted, but it also is done in a way that will be usable for today, tomorrow, and into the future, in the same, in fact, in a better way, in some sense, than the TASD report, which has continued to be used. I think your report is not a one-time thing. Don't think of it as, you did all this work and what's happened. That's not how to think of it. What you've done is you've set in motion a process, and I want to come back to the process in a minute. And that's a really, really important contribution. I know it may not feel like it because you guys are down into the weeds, but from where I sit, that's really the crucial part. We've got to get a process going, and you guys have started the process. What is the process? To me, the process is we have to change the mindset of not just people in Tacoma Park, but everywhere. If you think of the analogy of smoking, it used to be that, a lot of people smoked. Most people smoked. It was socially acceptable and so on. That has been changed. And that's the process we need to do. We need to change the mindset of people. And I have some ideas about how you do that kind of process. But that's what we need to think about. And each of the items is then a piece in that process and supports that process. So it'd be the kind of thing where you pick something easy to start with, and we talk about it a lot, like a drum beat, if you will, okay? And you get people knowledge. First they have to get knowledgeable, then they have to change their behavior, their attitudes and practice, CAP. I'm sure you've heard of that kind of process. And then with a success under people's belts, then you move on to the next thing. Okay, and you don't have to just do one. You can do several. I'm just using one as an example. But you want the process to go forward. And to me, the process has two pieces. One is there are, of course, things the city administration can do. Putting energy-efficient lights in this building is a great thing. But we'll have a much bigger impact if everyone in the city does it. So the city can be modeling the behavior or, something like that, demonstrating that it can be done, we can facilitate and so on. But what we really would like is for the residents to do it, because that'll be a much bigger impact. If the city quits idling its cars, to pick Steve's example, great. But what would be much bigger is if everybody in the city quit idling their cars, that kind of thing. So I think that we need to think about moving the process, not the items themselves, moving the process forward. And then I have one last cautionary comment. So I've observed this over and over and over again. And it's very hard to deal with. And that's why it's better to have a process, because then people won't focus on this issue, which is very simply, costs are a line item in the budget, but savings never appear. And there will be people on the council, in the administration, in the city, who will say, you are raising my taxes, regardless of the fact that you are saving them gobs of money. All they see is the tax rate has gone up. That's all they see. Absolutely, the conversation stops right there. The fact that they are now saving gobs of money doesn't compute, if you will. Why should I buy a more expensive refrigerator, for example, that will save me hundreds of dollars in the long run if it costs me $50 more this year? The same thing with a furnace. Why should I buy an energy-efficient furnace in my house? Even if it's going to pay for itself. It's very hard to get around that mindset. And if you let the discussion focus on the cost and savings part of it, you'll lose all those people. That's why it's better to do, that's what I think anyway, it's better to do the mindset part. It's the right thing to do. People in Tacoma Park will respond to it. So for me, rather than picking particular items, I would rather think about how the city can involve people in the community in this process of starting with some items, getting the drumbeat going, and then moving forward with it. And I'll give one example. The city finally purchased, energy credits for 100% wind power. That's an accomplishment. We shouldn't forget that we have, in fact, had some accomplishments, The city pioneered recycling in Montgomery County, and it's worth, I've lived here through that process, and it's worth thinking about it. The city did it for a while, and my observation is finally the state said, oh yeah, recycling, let's have a 5-year plan. And they had this 5-year plan, and what happened is the mindset changed, and people said, well, geez, if we're just going to do recycling, let's just do it all at once. Don't phase it in over 5 years, let's do it all. And I think that's what we're looking for, the kind of thing where you get people thinking in new ways, and then you get kind of a tipping point and everyone gets on board with it. And that's the process I'd like to see moving forward. And I'll stop there.
There's other lights. I don't know who wants to.
It's been a while since I've had a turn to talk.
Go ahead.
Must be my light that's lit brightest. Well, I'm going to be...
That's not energy efficient.
I want to be specific. There's some things that I think that we can, that I'm more enthusiastic about, and that probably has to do with the fact that some of these things I can figure out, I can sort of see how you would do them. Some of these others, some of the other recommendations, I just don't understand them enough in order to be able to appreciate them enough. I think that the charrette recommendation for the Tacoma Junction would be one of my high priorities, because I have been advocating since I've been on the city council for a year that the city, working with the state, look at very seriously trying to develop a way by which we can eliminate maybe all the traffic lights in Tacoma Junction. Maybe not, I don't know. But by devising a set of roundabouts or medians up there and reworking all the public space that's between the two sides so that we can accomplish getting pedestrians across safely and we can keep the traffic moving. Because right now, I went out there one day and I timed the light. I forget that little side street. Is that Sycamore that comes in on the side beside the co-op? It was a 1 minute and 33-second wait for traffic on Ethan Allen to go westbound, get past that traffic light. And this cars, you're talking about idling, and there's this huge amount of time. There's nothing going through the light. It's just like a dead zone. You could go out there and smoke a couple cigarettes, you know. So I think I don't want to get carried away and waste your time. I think I've made my point. I think the idea of our taking ownership of the street lamps is something that makes an awful lot of sense. I've had occasion at the Maryland Municipal League conference a few weeks ago to learn a lot about how this has been done elsewhere and some of the pitfalls that we have to be very wary of, particularly when we start messing around underground wiring, and some of which has been there for decades and decades. But there is a way by which we can at least obtain ownership of the lamps, the poles, and the lamps themselves, and be able to control our lighting, enhance it where it needs to be enhanced, fill it in where it's absent, lower it where it's creating too much light, and all that sort of stuff. And I think we can reduce our costs, which is the main thing. I like the idea of doing these pilots because I think that it is a way of just breaking the inertia. The best way to get started sometimes is just to get started. And once you get rolling, all kinds of things start to become apparent that are possible. And I know I'm saying what you would be saying. These aren't not original ideas. I particularly am attracted by the rewards for recycling. I had one of the reasons that got me thinking about this, I got an email from a property owner, I guess about a year or so ago, who had 1 or 2 units, and she was classified as multifamily housing, and she was being charged for trash pickups. But her units were vacant. She hadn't had any luck in getting them rented, but yet she was still paying for commercial trash pickup, and she was just saying, this is crazy. I'm paying for for services that I don't even need or use because my units are vacant. And she said, if you had a program where you paid by weight or volume or however you do it, then, if I didn't have tenants, then I wouldn't be generating waste and I wouldn't be being unfairly taxed. So I think it could benefit all of us, and it would be an incentive. And I think it's something, it's not trying to invent something new under the sun. You've already explained to us that Tacoma, Washington is doing it. There's a lot of ways of doing it, and I think that's something we ought to be able to start work on. We're going to be talking more about this when we get in January at our January 10th meeting on the tree ordinance. Others of us have talked about this idea on the City Council, trying to figure out a way to incentivize property owners for the city to be able to plant trees on private property, not just the public right-of-way, because right now that's all the city can do. And I think there ought to be a way to be able to do that so that because that's really the only way we're going to be able to restore our tree canopy. And I want to pursue that idea. And then another idea, which is not mentioned in your report at all, but something that I think, and I'm not sure it's going to do very much for global warming or climate change, I think is the preferred term these days, is to develop a ban on plastic bags. in Tacoma Park. I was talked out of trying to do anything last year because I was told, oh, the Maryland State Legislature is working on it. And maybe they were, but nothing materialized, and I'm sure I'll be told the same thing again this year, and I don't know whether anything will materialize. But the point is that all of these things, you know, we can argue, people will argue, well, this is just one little city of 19,000 people, and if we did all of your thing in this whole, all these 80-some pages, it isn't really going to make a big difference in climate change. But I think, and I know others will agree, is that the point is that if we lead in this area, around, when I say this region, others are going to follow. And I think that's the key to it. And I think we have the ability to lead. We have the smarts to do that. And I think if we can do these sorts of things, other municipalities in Maryland and Northern Virginia, places like that, will start to imitate each other, because because what we like to do when we sit here and talk about these ideas is we like to say, oh, well, Hyattsville is doing this. And we say, oh, well, hey, Hyattsville's doing it. Let's go over there and look at what they're doing. Or Kensington's doing this. Or Rockville. And that, all of a sudden, that sort of says, that takes away all the naysayers who say, oh, you can't do that. It's never been done before. Well, I think we need to be pushing ahead on these things. And so those are just a short list of things that I think are within the realm of doability in the reasonable near future. That's all we want to say at this point.
And I'll just jump in for a minute. I usually try and hold back toward the end, but I've got a couple things I'm just going to throw in here real quick, and then I'll head down this way to other colleagues. One thing I just wrote down as Councilmember Schultz was talking that we have done that other people, because I was thinking about the fact that in many ways we may have led the way on some things, but it's been a long time since we led the way and we've fallen behind, and I subscribe to that view. But one thing that we did do, at least in our own small way, was to prevent the city from purchasing bottled water. And at least, we did that. I took, what for it at various places where I met other elected officials. It's like, oh, there you go again. But it's a real step. And in this discussion that we've had at the beginning of the discussion of the task force report, we came to the agreement that the city would no longer use gas-powered leaf blowers. I don't know if there's anything that we have to do other than just that got established, whether we have to do any change by the council for that, but if we do, I think we could do that. But I wasn't even sure we needed to do any more than express the will that that's the case.
I think my recommendation would be that we actually enact a resolution in January. I think that would just formalize this council's intent and move that forward.
Okay. And I think it would be easy to talk to State Highway again about light timing. We did have a good discussion here with the State Highway Administrator, so we're having ongoing discussions at the staff level about various aspects of dealing with 410 and trying to come up with some additional work on light timing there is something that I think we would have the ability to press for. I think that we are doing stormwater retrofits. We've had some successful ones, and we're going to have to come up with a lot more given the requirements for cleaning up the bay. And I think that whether we want to or not, we are going to be doing a lot more of those in the very near future. And I think we want to do it. I think we're also working on getting ownership and control of the streetlights. There's a lot going on right now with the Public Service Commission and the Pepco rate case. The Montgomery chapter of Maryland Municipal League, of which I'm president, is knee-deep in this right now. I get like 3 emails a day from our lawyer about trying to work out the details on this. It's not pretty. It's nothing I would want to have to try and explain to anybody, but we're making some headway, and I think there are going to be more opportunities for purchasing the streetlights. A lot of municipalities in Montgomery County are really interested in this. Poolsville already bought theirs, but they don't have Pepco. They have Potomac Edison. And so there's just a lot going on in that area. The other things that have come up that I think we could make some commitments to pursue were two of the things that we talked about this evening. I'd like the idea of pursuing whatever we can on the food waste collection, and I'll say that in previous discussions at the council, I was one of the naysayers on a fee for waste disposal, but I feel like I've made headway on that one, and I'm prepared to say that's something I could support and something I'd want to see us do. I think it's playing catch-up in many ways to a lot of jurisdictions, and it sounds like from the discussion from the Public Works Director, we have some of the infrastructure already in place. I don't think it would be that hard a lift for us to do, and I think we could put that on our list of things to try and work into the upcoming budget. And I'll stop there, and to colleagues on my left, and I know Councilmembers Robinson and Wright have their lights on, so take a pick, whoever goes first.
Okay. Thanks for coming. It is a good report. It will give us food for thought for a long time into the future. Like the TASD report, it sets a bar or sets a place to work from, and not everything's going to get done now, but it will give us things to work on in the future. When I'm waiting for my colleagues to speak, as my colleagues speak, I tend to write down things, and so I'm going to read some of the things I've written down. We have houses and buildings which need to be addressed. We have waste streams of all sorts that we need to address. We have traffic and engines and air and that sort of things. If I'm kind of categorizing things, and then trees and natural environment and stormwater. So I'm kind of put those things in my mind as categories. Then I think about things that we could do as a we in the city, both. And there's us in the government, and then there's the vast majority of people. And if majority of people take pride in the outcome of what they're doing, and if it's broad-based, and if it's somehow quantifiable, and if it somehow adds to our reputation, and if it's somehow economically viable, those are things that strike me as really worthwhile pursuing. So as we evaluate the things that we're looking at. The specifics, yeah, let's do the stoplight timing. That's not too tough. Well, maybe it is, but it's worth pursuing. I'm on for the fee for waste. I think that we should try that because it would be something that people could be proud of in their own way. I'm sorry, the composting and food waste, that's something that people could be proud of in their own way, and it has the capacity to engage a whole lot of people, and something we can count, and something that will add to our reputation, something that can be economically viable. So I'm on for both the compost and the fee for waste and the stoplight timing. And I think that I liked the high priority item about energy efficiency rent increase petitions, because I think that would draw us into evaluating our buildings and figuring out how to make them efficient. And one of my little pet things these days is, well, how do we keep the large buildings intact? And replacing the infrastructure of large buildings is a really good way to keep them intact. And in fact, if we're going to have rent stabilization, or then encouraging landlords to increase the efficiency of their internal structures is a really good one way to at least approach two problems at once. One, the energy efficiency of the buildings, and two, trying to keep buildings from deteriorating over time. So I think that's a really good one. I'd like to see us have a sustainability coordinator to try to help us pull all these things off. If that can't happen because we can't commit to that as a budgetary item, then we're going to all have to pitch in. The staff is going to have to pitch in its copious free time to try to do this, to try to do some of these things. And I take Councilmember Snipper's point that it's the savings. It's like the economy's stupid. It's the savings stupid. but somebody in-house who can track those savings and then confront the criticisms that, oh my gosh, it's just costing more, by saying, no, actually, we are saving, because lay out the document how it is that we're saving money and doing all these things, in addition to saving the planet and so forth. So there I blabbed through all of my little points here. The streetlights is a big one. I leave it to the likes of Daryl, who's studied this for many, many years, to bring us viable approaches to making this happen. The fear, of course, is that it would cost an arm and a leg and another arm and another leg to buy up our streetlights, but maybe we can find some path through these thickets. Trees, of course. Stormwater, yes. As the mayor said, we have a big stormwater issue kind of rumbling towards us from the EPA, and anything we can do to try to address those challenges is going to be important. So they're my top 5. Energy efficiency rent increase petition, the compost food waste, FIFA waste, stoplight timing, and the top of the heap as a sustainability coordinator, who I think would pay for him or herself very quickly.
Councilmember Wright.
Thanks. So Tacoma Park has fallen behind. We've done some things. We've got to 100% wind power. The mayor mentioned the bottled water purchasing that we stopped doing. But we've realized we fell behind, and we asked you all to come together and make recommendations to us. And you did a fabulous job at that. You've done an amazing report that's got great concrete things in it for us. And I know that many of you are frustrated in the process about how long this has taken for us to go through all of it and trying to come to some conclusion about what we want to do as a city. But I also know that you are willing, as environmental leaders in the city, to be engaged in a further way if we ask you to be engaged in specific concrete ways. So what I propose is a Green Deal for Tacoma Park. It starts off with a commitment to residents that they know that 1 cent of the tax rate is going to this Green Deal effort. That equates to about $190,000, $185,000, if I remember correctly. And in that Green Deal, I propose you get 10 things. The first is that we hire a sustainability coordinator. That person's job would be to coordinate our overall efforts with a big emphasis on something that Ruben alluded to, which is education of the community and all the steps that community members can take to become more environmentally conscious and address climate change. 2 is to add to the city's effort to stop using leaf blowers, to do a seasonal leaf blower ban, so that people would not use their leaf blowers in times when they're really blowing dust around and not blowing around leaves. Acknowledging that some people still need to do that during the fall and certain times in the spring, but a seasonal ban is very achievable and a great first step to educating people and making a statement. 3 is around stormwater. So to do 2 things specifically around stormwater is to really be much more aggressive about all the retrofits that we're going to have to do and use the money that we have in the stormwater fund to do that. And the second is to take a much more aggressive approach on tree planting and to get over the hurdle of the fact that there's very easy ways to structure planting trees on personal property and getting people to agree to it, and that it's very clear that trees improve stormwater and that the stormwater funds can be used for tree planting. 4 is to create a streetlight working group. So there are strides going on, but I imagine that when we do have greater clarity about how to do the streetlight purchase, there's still going to need to be additional technical assistance and expertise to hammer out actually doing it. So we start now, we get a small group of very engaged citizens who care about this issue to help us move forward with the lawyers and to push, and also prepare if we need to engage in a political battle and advocacy battle to get what needs in place to make streetlights happening. 5 is that we have a working group on the either you want to call it solar array or group energy purchasing. It's talked about in a couple different ways in the report, but there are opportunities for people to not install solar panels on their houses because of the many trees, but there are other locations. There's schools, there's businesses. We actually just heard about an entire abandoned school in Ward 3 where the person's trying to figure out how to economically make that property work, and there's great opportunity to install solar panels there. There are places to do it. We need a working group to figure out how the economics work and to actually hammer out the places to make that happen. 6 is to do the very simple thing of piloting the composting that I and others have suggested. 7 is the fee waste program. 8 is the energy efficiency rent petition. 9 is the highway light timing. And 10 is the way we keep track, really, around greenhouse gas emissions. So to have a greenhouse gas emission plan, a working group that actually helps us to figure out monitoring that and works in partnership with COG. COG keeps talking about doing this for the region. My sense is they have some of the resources, and we need to help them drive it down to the local level. So those are my 10 things for the green deal for Tacoma Park. Maybe I don't have them right. Maybe we should take one out and put another one in. But I'm convinced that the residents of Tacoma Park, if presented the option to very clearly know what a portion of their tax dollars are going to, are willing to vote for that and support that even in tight times. And I know that I'm making a bold proposal, and I know that all my council colleagues might not be on board at the beginning of the proposal. But I would encourage us all, as we digest this proposals and the other things that our council members have pushed for, is that to think not about, to think about that fierce urgency of now. This is a problem we need to address. And then in 10 years, do we want to be remembered for making some minor resolution about this referendum related to zoning? People aren't going to remember 99% of the things we voted on. But people will remember a city council that took a stand and changed the direction of the city back into an environmental leadership, and they'll say the council in 2010 was the council that did that. And I think we can commit to that now. We can commit to the 1% in next year's budget. Sure, that's going to mean some tough decisions, but if we know that's in there and people are willing to support it, that's okay. I would even advocate that we start to fund that environmental sustainability coordinator in February, because the reality is we, as usual, have a chunk of unspent money, and I'm convinced that residents want us to spend that money on environmental leadership.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor. And I thank my colleagues for all their comments on this task force report. I haven't prepared such a detailed plan as Councilmember Wright did, but I fully support the spirit of his presentation. As I said back when this report was first presented to the council, I don't want to be picking and choosing. We ask the community and the task force to present ideas on what ought to be done. I think the only question that I have is which ones can we do first and how soon can we do them. I like Councilmember Wright's proposal. I don't know that I would be prepared to go down through and pick item 1 through 10 of what should be first. I would like to see the council agree to resources that could be put to this, and then have the task force continued to make a decision on how those limited resources would be best used, with the idea that, as Councilmember Rubin said, a big part of this on the front end is community education and getting the entire community on board. I don't see how we could move forward very rapidly and very far without having some staff commitment to this. And again, I would defer some of this to the city manager on helping us to decide on what resources we could commit to this at this point in time, and get some direction from the council to the city manager so that she's making the proper allocation of resources to environmental issues in her proposed budget for next year. So I guess that's not as specific a plan as Councilmember Wright has proposed, but I think it synchronizes with it well. We have to have some resources. We need to determine that and give direction now.
And along those lines, I would say that one of the tasks I see us undertaking in January is, when we come back from the winter recess, to be in a position to give the city manager some preliminary direction on directions to go as she puts together the budget. And it would be the appropriate time for us to say, gee, if we said we wanted to look for a penny on the tax rate to be devoted to environmental initiatives or whatever the proposal might be, that's the time I think we can give that and have it borne through in the budget that she puts together.
I would like to suggest that if that's the pleasure of the council and kind of the direction we think that we're going to go, that we should continue the task force and ask for their input on how that amount of money would be targeted towards the recommendations.
Do I recollect correctly that technically, currently, there is no task force?
Yeah, along with the task force is dead.
Yes, okay. That's what I thought.
As of March.
We still all have emails, though.
Yes. Let me make a proposal to see if I can.
I still have a question on the table.
Oh, go ahead. I didn't see your light on. What's the
That's
question?
because I already asked the question.
What was the question?
The question was about the public-private partnerships.
That's actually exactly what I wanted to ask you about, or try to elaborate. I was very taken, and I think many people on the task force were, with a presentation given at one of our earlier meetings by a guy from, and correct me, I'm not going to get the name wrong, but I think it's the Institute for Public-Private Partnerships in D.C. He was very excited about the idea of purchasing streetlights. Speaking for myself, to try to summarize that idea, I don't think we have any. I think there are potential savings, certainly. I don't know if we can sit here right now and quantify them. I was interested in hearing from the mayor about the process that's going on now, and I'm hoping that many different municipalities perhaps could be involved almost as a consortium in doing this kind of thing. That was the idea of this guy who spoke to us, was that if you get a private company involved, you have some kind of agreement with them. They end up taking the risks. They, may buy the stuff, or you have a maintenance agreement with them and you actually own it. But the more, good, that's not mine. I don't think I have one. The more municipalities you have involved, the more savings you're going to get. So I don't know where that's going, but I think a lot of it is just doing some research on the front end, talking to this guy who advocates for public-private partnerships, finding out if that's a good idea or if it's a better idea to, in league with a number of other cities of like size or larger size, Hyattsville, Kensington, Chevy Chase, et cetera, get together and try to achieve bang for the buck. Hate to say that, but that is, efficiencies with...
Well, that's distributed
some-
risk.
Yeah.
You know, is what the public-private partnership we're
Okay.
talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to the legalities or the financial details. More work would have to be done, but it sounds like there is some work going on now anyway. So I'd like to hear more about that.
My understanding is the public-private partnership is simply usually a source of capital. You want to do a project, you don't have the money, and bonding is one way to raise funds, and using private investors with a long-term contract and purchase agreement is another way to do it, and it can be applied to almost anything you can come up with, but the presenter was intrigued with the streetlight idea and thought it was a promising type structure, and then all the technical details are what he's and his organization's all about.
Is there a difference from what you selected for a public-private partnership and what you said, the city should pay for this? Like, what motivated you to pick public-private partnership? Because our job up here is going to be to figure out how to budget this, and I'm really supportive of a lot of different things. Be happy to be one of the minimum of 4 votes of people who has to agree to the variety of things. But the task that we have to do that I think you don't have to do, and which I don't think actually I would kick back to you even with the 1% tax rate, because that's essentially a core part of our job, is to make the decisions about what we're going to fund and how we're going to fund it. And so in that sense, it's helpful for me to understand, like, why would the city just pay for this outright? And why would we pursue this as a public-private partnership? Or when you said public-private partnership, is it not that you specifically think that this particular activity is particularly right for public-private partnership? Or should we view that as one of a number of ways that we might finance things, including through bonding to come up with a sort of a self-sustaining fund where the energy savings pay for itself through through monies that would then essentially come. It seems like bonding would work for things where the money comes back to the city itself, but maybe for things when streetlights would be a good example of that savings, but where the money comes back to the individual resident, maybe it's other kinds of things. So does that make sense? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think there was a difference of opinion on the task force, and I think everyone was thinking, how are we going to fund this, because budget is really tight and, we're losing staff. How are we going to make the case for this? And I think that in some proposals, people grabbed onto that idea of, like, this is a way of funding it. I think generally, some of us were more enthusiastic about public-private partnerships and others than others. And I'm in that camp with you, where I see that, a contractor is going to come in and do things where they see a potential for long-term profit. And in some cases, it may make sense, but in some cases, when we're looking at public services, we don't want to put off that, privatize the long-term public gain. So in a way, it's different ways of thinking about it, and I'm not sure that we had a very disciplined approach. I think it was, as I said, there were different individuals that proposed and wrote up things, and we tried to discuss to the extent that we could, but we also had deadlines that we were working towards. So I think it's more the latter of what you suggested, is that it's an option in some cases, and the city should think through what would be the best option at this point in time for this project.
So I guess what I would be interested in knowing before we go forward to the budget discussion is maybe which one from the experts in the area. Like, I could see how the organic waste composting might be particularly right for a public-private partnership because of the technical issues and the investment that an entity would have already had to make, like the Delaware Group, which has the technology, would cite something. It would be more regional in nature, or place in in Howard County, where you ship the stuff up to. But your private partner would bring something specific to the table that you need, whereas in the example of the streetlights,
I'm not sure what that would be unless it was an economy of scale of the folks who were doing the repairs, which would sort of beg the Pepco already does that question, or, something of that nature. So I guess I would be interested for those people who are the experts in the area where you recommended a public-private partnership, if you think there's a specific reason to go with that over something else. That would be really helpful to me moving forward, personally, in the decision.
I think in general, public-private partnerships, there are two things that drive them. One is that there's a chance for the private entity to make a profit off of it. Secondly, if you're running out of bonding authority, which a lot of public entities are doing, then they need to find something other than bonds. But if, for example, and I'll just take the streetlights, if there seems to be a clear cost-benefit analysis and the city can save money, and the money you save can be used to pay off the bonds, it would seem to me, personally, that bonding would be the way to go. It would be, quick and simple, and but the other thing a public-private partnership brings is the private partner will bring some expertise in the area that you're trying, like you mentioned, the composting. But they would have done this kind of thing before, so they know the ropes. And so that's another bit of value add that they bring to it.
Councilmember Schultz, you had another question. Councilmember Ray, I didn't know whether you had, is that a leftover night? No. Okay.
There's another aspect I think that public-private partnerships can do, and that is that municipalities by nature are constrained from doing certain things, not just by budget, but by simple legalities. For example, I mean, we can't play favorites with certain businesses in our procurement. But if you work with a private entity or a nonprofit entity, which in this case would be the other end of a partnership, they can pick and choose how they want to work with other private entities. So I think that's one of the areas that I think private-public partnerships could greatly facilitate our being a means to an end. It's not just necessarily limited to financial benefits where each ends up having to be profitable. Obviously, that's usually the case, but sometimes the city can literally work with a private entity, in effect sort of say, we can't do this, you can. There's some things that you can't do that we can. And so there's sort of a natural bond that goes there between the two entities. Thank you.
Councilmember Wright.
I was just going to add on the public-private partnership. I think it is that they usually work when there's some sort of stream of money that's going to be relatively consistent to monetize so that they can invest up front, that they bring some level of expertise that we might not have, and lastly, that they can somehow do something that the government can't do. I think those are the right, the ways you'd look at it. I acknowledge probably you're writing the report, you're under the gun, you can't quite figure out how to pay for something. Public-private partnership in some cases might seem like a solution, so you write it down as something to investigate. I think that's the right thing to do. And I think, some of the things that I mentioned, the more complex and thorny issues, the street lights and the kind of solar array or energy purchasing are things where a public-private partnership could work out, but we really need a set of dedicated individuals who want to investigate that thing to help us sort out, answer some of Colleen's questions. Does that make sense here, or should we do it ourselves through bonding, or is there some other way? I agree with many of the things Councilmember Seaman said, but I think the task force actually doesn't want us to ask them again what they think we should do. I think that at this point they actually just want us to do something, like to choose some of the things, and let's go forward, and there are many of those things they would like to be engaged in concrete ways. And I agree very much with Councilmember Clay that that's sort of our responsibility. We're going to have to be answerable to the taxpayers for the 1 cent, if it's 1 cent or half a cent or 2 cents that we're saying are going to be dedicated to this. And I think that it then is on our shoulders to try and make those optimizing decisions based on some of the recommendations you've given us, and probably some ongoing dialogue.
And in that light, what I'd like to propose is that we revisit this in January when we come back, and then that in the intervening time, we think about which pieces we might want to put in the 10-point plan, the green proposal, whatever we're going to call it. I like that construct because I think it makes it easier to engage in the piece of it that people have talked about as being important as the public education piece. It's going to make it much easier to deal with it if we've got a nice package for it. I think it's going to require us deciding which pieces go in it and how much to fund it with, but I think it's a good way to go forward. And we've had, I think, some general agreement on some items, some still to coalesce items that can go in there. So I think coming up with the priorities of the things that go in there, being prepared to have that discussion in January so that we can give some direction to the city manager about the amount that we want to see in the upcoming budget discussion in the spring. And that will also coincide with any discussions that we have with the community at large about the budget process, our priorities, their priorities, and how you go about funding new initiatives in the face of, I think, declining resources, and how important those priorities are. That, again, is a part of the education piece, but it does the education while giving us the ability to move forward with some concrete proposals and get some things moving. So if there's general agreement with that way of going forward.
One comment.
Yes.
At the risk of extending this beyond, because there was a supplemental sheet that was handed out at the last council meeting that didn't get discussed, and I don't think many of you were aware of it, or at least when we talked about the food waste. I just wanted to make sure I'll point your attention to the fact that we have had some conversations and there are some actions that we can take to pursue solar installations on city buildings through competitive bid proposal. And so I just wanted to draw your attention to that. It is something that, with your approval, we're hoping to get an RFP pulled together, or could get an RFP pulled together in December and actually have some responses by January, that we would then have a much better sense of what we're looking at in terms of what the cost per kilowatt would be, how many vendors are interested in participating or offering proposals.
Do you need anything from us to enable you to continue doing that?
I don't think so, in that the assumption is that it wouldn't be additional cost. It would be at or below our existing costs.
Okay. So are people in agreement that we have a way forward here? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Sure. We have one remaining item.
An hour and a half left.
We were on that item for, an hour and three-quarters. And that item, the remaining item is discussion of repairs to certain sections of Route 410. We have a memo from staff. Darrell, do you want to walk us through that real quickly?
Yes, I unfortunately didn't grab it, but thank you. My recollection is I know this issue's come up as to what can we do in the interim between now and whenever final decisions are made or the street is actually resurfaced. And, of course, we're talking about Ethan Allen section of 410. So what we were able to do in talking with the city engineer and our contractor who does a lot of street work for us is lay out a variety of options for the short term. And we wanted to just provide those to you as well as our own recommendations. I think from the staff's perspective, gives us a little bit of heartburn to spend money to spend it again, especially given what all else those dollars could be doing. But understanding the realities of the situation and the urgent need for the city to take some action. So we've laid out three options for you. One is to do temporary repairs, basically simple pothole repairs on the worst sections of that street by contractor. and assuming that that would be something that would be done every 4 to 6 weeks, because they will fail and they will pop out, and it'll be totally dependent on freezing temperature and water. If we have a cold, dry winter, they'll stay in place. If we have a wet freeze-thaw cycle, everything is up for grabs. So the option to do that, and again, I'm recommending, particularly in the short term, that that's something we do via contractor and not city crews because of the current operation of leaf collection, which has got 100% of our staff occupied. Be about $2,000, and again, that's an estimate every time they go out to do, a pothole maintenance work. And assuming between now and March, we assume they'd have to do that 4 times. So that's just a rough idea. The second is to mill and resurface the worst sections of the street. And I think with that, something got lost in the details here. In the second option, basically what we would do is we estimated about 30% of the street is currently in need of severe work. And what we could do is do it as a temporary measure, basically mill 1.5 or 2 of the street and resurface it, and then come spring, when it's done for real, we basically mill off what we put down and resurface it again. So it will be money spent for the short term and then have to be redone. There is the potential option of doing it in a more permanent way. Our recommendation when we do that street, either us or the state, in a permanent repair mode, that we would use paving fabric between the concrete subbase and the asphalt surface itself. It's something that helps to keep cracks from coming up from the concrete during seasonal weather changes. And it helps to preserve your asphalt life, especially when you have a street over a concrete subbase. So we could do the 30% of the street with the full range of work where we mill, we lay fabric, and we put the asphalt down, assuming that that will be in place permanently, well, for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, depending on how long the street lasts. And then in the spring, we would do the rest of the street, basically the other 70% of the street. The pluses of that is you don't spend the money to then mill it and do it again in the spring. The minus of that is it would mean that you'd have a newly paved street that would have horizontal seams in it every place you did those sections of permanent road repair, now versus when we did the road itself. So again, the life and death of a road is totally dependent on water getting into your road. So having a seam means you have a weak spot in a road, and you can pretty much guarantee that that's where your failure will start. So it's a way to spend the money without spending it twice, but it does, in some ways, weaken and give you a substandard road surface in that you'll have seams. And the third option was one that the contractor recommended. I don't think it would be met with much support, but in the interest of laying out every option we could come up with, basically there are, it has been done where you just mill. You mill off the bad section of the road, and you realize that you're going to be driving on bad rough concrete subbase, and that is an improvement over the pothole and rutted and heaved nature of the street now. So you basically just shave off a layer, make it a little more smooth, albeit it's not a road surface smooth, it's just a milled surface smooth. And if you've ever driven over a milled street, it's kind of like a gravel road, not quite, but it has that sort of feel to it. Better than what we have, not a paved street. But again, in the interest of not spending money twice and trying to think of outside the box, that's an option where you could mill, leave the road exposed, and then in the spring when the weather and all cooperates, you could come in and do your final pavement. The only potential risk involved there is if you do have some cracked concrete subbase, by milling and leaving it open, you're basically going to create some further deterioration that would then have to be repaired in the spring. You're leaving it in an exposed state. I don't think you could create a problem where one didn't exist, but if we already have cracking in the subbase, we'll exacerbate that problem, though we probably, hopefully, would need to repair it anyway in the spring, whether we left it open or not. So those are the three options that we could come up with, and their different cost implications are listed there. Again, as with most of this, until you're actually out there doing it, you can't put a fine dollar and cent on it, but I think we've got a fairly in the range of realities type of cost figures there.
Thank you. Councilmember Clay.
Okay, so on option 2, do you cut the concrete, or you just mill
the surface?
And then where the concrete's broken, you fix it?
In a temporary measure, we wouldn't fix it. If we were just milling and paving to give a temporary surface until the spring when we do it for real, we wouldn't do the repair.
So how come in option 2 then, so in option 2 you would redo, I don't get it. If you're going to grind it down and then cover it with asphalt, why would you not be redoing this same part of the road in the spring, and then therefore, if you were redoing it, why would you have seamed sections?
Well, there's option 2A and B. Option 2A is you just mill it, you pave it, knowing that you're going to come back in the spring and mill what you just paved and repave it. Option 2B is you mill and pave, you identify any sub-base faults, you repair them, you put the filter fabric down, you pave, but then you know that those sections you'll have to mill and pave up to in the spring, and you'll leave them. So you'll have kind of a patchwork final road surface once you come back to do the rest of the street, the other 70%.
Okay. So then, let's say that the state was going to repave this road under any one of the number of scenarios that they put forth. I don't care which one, but just assuming that the state paid for it. If we came along and we did option 2, where we milled and put asphalt on top of the worst sections, would the state not redo those sections then?
I would assume that they would.
They would redo them. Okay. I'm surprised it's 30% of the road. We must own less than I really think, or more of the road you've rated in really bad condition.
Yeah, I mean, that 30% is the worst sections.
It is the worst sections
of the road. It's not everything, and it's in some sections of the road, it's one side is bad, the other side's okay. Some sections of the road, both sides are bad. So it's really just a.
But can we do this now that it's the end of November?
Asphalt plants generally stay open until Christmas. And that's when they start shutting down. Last year, they were open longer. They were open into January. It's just dependent on
but if we had
weather
a storm on December 13th like we had last year, would we just be SOL?
It just depends on what the weather that comes after it.
All right.
And a lot of it just depends on who in the area is doing work. If State Highway is doing a big project, there's going to be some asphalt plants that are going to stay open to satisfy their project. I just don't know at this rate if anybody's got any large projects going on in the Washington metropolitan area that somebody will be supplying asphalt for.
Okay. So I noticed that you I think it's you guys who patched the what I think is a big hot pothole, because the motorcycle it's huge. The car it's not so bad. But the motorcycle it's a giant pothole. At the curve, where it rounds and was the 200 block, essentially. How long does that patch last?
In general, temporary patches don't last very long, but again, it's dependent on the weather. If we have this rain that comes on Wednesday, and if the temperatures drop to freezing after that, that patch will be out. It'll crack up and lift up and be gone.
Okay, one last question. Let's say you milled and paved over that area, and you milled it down, and then the hole was there. What do you do to that before you pave it that will make it so that it won't erupt all winter long?
You take out the bad concrete and you re-pour it.
You do, just for that little section?
Whatever section is in bad shape. It's both myself and our contractor's assumption that we're not going to find much bad concrete subbase. We really think the problem is with the patches and the utility cuts and the pavement work. We think it's within the top few inches. We don't really think we're going to find a whole lot of bad subbase. We could be wrong.
Okay. Well, I guess I don't like option 3 very much, because I think it'll just drive people onto the side streets. But I'm a little torn between option 1 and 2, but I think I would lean towards 2A, where we fixed the worst parts of it and paid for it like we originally talked about out of the reserve fund. And when we came back to next year, that we would fix the whole road, you know, in a seamless kind of a road. And the reason that I would do that is I think that it could be a while before we really settle this issue with the state. I mean, it's not like, unless we give up on trying to engage the state in paying for it, it means if we give up in March, when the asphalt places reopen, we could do the road from end to end, but my inclination, or my intuition tells me that we're not going to be done with this issue by March. And I think for the amount of time that we're talking about, which is, I think, going to be longer than till March, and if the state pays for it, we know that it's not going to start until, the repaving part really isn't going to start until July 1st. So I guess I would pay the $30,000 to $50,000 to have them fix it.
Councilmember Wright.
Councilmember Clay, you probably have the most insight into the state paying and when they might, because I think you've had the most conversations with Delegate Mazur's staff who's been working on this. Do you have a sense at all of, like, it seems like they're most likely to at least pay a one-time, you know, like they've had the road for a while, or have thought they've had, and have allowed these bad cuts to happen, so it seems like at least they're on the hook for like redoing it once, right?
I think as a matter of policy, they could redo it once, but it's really anyone's guess as to whether or not we're going to get the money out of the state. I think it's going to be a question of how politically effective we are as a group of 7 elected officials and 4 people in our state level, and maybe a couple other people who live in or around the area that might help us out. I think it's going to be a matter of political arm twisting, and I really truly wouldn't venture a guess, but I'd say of the more likely that we'll get a one-time fix out of them, end to end.
Yeah, that was my
Councilmember Robinson.
At first, I'm drawn to number 3. Maybe it's just I'm the odd person out all these times, but it would be better. We could put up little signs saying the state put us in this state. And then we could fix it, and it would have been better, and then it would be really good later on. And we wouldn't be spending money twice, and we'd save money, and then our citizens would say, oh, well, I have to undergo a little bit of a discomfort now, but at least they're saving money and doing something that's appropriate. But I can also see the wisdom in number 2 and really fixing the sections that really need it, although it's more money. So I'm torn. I don't really like number 1 if it's just throwing money at the problem and then it all busts out and we are back at ground zero again. I don't know.
Councilmember Schultz.
I guess I'm in favor of doing the cheapest possible. I didn't think I'd ever say that in my life, because my wife always tells me I have a beer wallet, whatever it is, champagne case, right? But we're not going to be able to get this street done correctly and fully until next year. And I'd rather conserve as many of our really, 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 really scarce dollars but at the same time make the street as safe as possible during that time. I wanted to ask, with regard to these cold patches, once you get past the freeze-thaw period, which I guess is April, late March, are they more durable after that? They tend to stay? I see. And those cost about $2,000 per swing through the, so if you had to go through like every 6 weeks and...
Yeah. Our contractor would charge us about, roughly about $2,000 to have a 3-person crew and the equipment necessary to go.
So we're talking maybe
spend a
about
day.
4 months, December, January, February, March, 6 weeks. That's about 13, 14 weeks, maybe three pass-throughs during the wintertime.
Yeah.
That would be like $6,000 to make the road safer than it is now. But clearly, but at the end of that time, we would have truly wasted that $6,000. There wouldn't be any good to come out of it. We'd start from scratch. I'm just worried about doing some of this work, doing a part job, and then the road not being fully paved, whether it's by us or by the state, until next summer, and some of that work starting to come undone. I'm just worried. I guess I'm really just worried about saving our dollars. And I think this is a compromise, a very big compromise, to try and figure out how to make it safe and sound for drivers and the people that live along the side of the street and have to put up with the thumping and the banging, but at the same time conserve every dollar we can, because money's scarce. It's going to get scarcer.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you. I initially favored option 1 also, but then I got to thinking about how this would actually play out. And it seems to me what would happen is inevitably some of these cold patches would pop out and we'd have holes and ruts and so on. And it would be hard to keep an even surface all winter long. So residents who drive it regularly will just be frustrated by the repeated potholes. It just look like we're, wasting money on it. So I've come to favor the option 2A, I think it was called, just because I think that we had planned to set aside this money. We talked about it, and I think it's we'll just work. We'll do our thing in December, and then in the spring, we'll be ready for SHA to come and do their bigger job, and this number 2A would last until July, certainly, when we hope they'd come through.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor. My concern is that as time passes, the roadway keeps getting worse, and that if it gets any worse, because I use that road, I'm going to have to recuse myself, because I'm going to benefit from whatever repairs do get made. I would just say that I support Councilmember Clay's suggestion, and I think we need to get it done. We need to be confident that we're going to be able to attract state funding to resolve this next spring.
And I'll say, I started out thinking number 1 was my choice, because it involved the least and could get us where we needed to go, because I guess I'm not sure that the state will reimburse for whatever costs we have now. So whatever money we spend, we're not going to get reimbursed for. As Public Works Director explained the options, I kind of then gravitated to number 3, just because it spends less money and isn't money spent on things that would have to be undone, and doesn't make anything worse, I don't think, because if there's cracks in the subbase that are left to get worse, they would have still been getting worse because there would be cracks above. So in some ways, it's just spending a little upfront money. And I guess my option with what I'm assuming 2A is, because I didn't keep track of 2A, 2B, whatever it was, I'm assuming that's put the fabric down and leave those pieces, or it's just
fabric, just mill it and pave it.
just mill it and pave it and rip it all up?
So in the end, yeah, it would all be ripped and
Because I don't like the option of doing the pieces that are going to stay with the fabric, because that just leaves the seams, and I think it just opens it up to a shorter term for whatever goes in next, and makes whoever's going to have to deal with it next have to deal with it a lot sooner. So I was trying to keep track of where people were ending up on this, and I kind of gave up. I wasn't sure I had an accurate count if there were, if there was a majority on any one particular thing. I guess my sense is how many people ended up on 2A, which is essentially 2 on the sheet here, which is mill it, pave it, and see it gone in the spring or summer, whenever it happens.
And what does that cost again?
$30,000 to $50,000.
30 to 50.
And I think Terry was on that list, too.
Terry?
Yeah, Terry, Ruben, and Colleen.
Are you on for 2A?
Put your hand in the air. I don't think at this point it matters what the rest of us might want. There's 4 votes for that. So
You could vote for it or not, then you could be like,
well, I
then you
think
can get credit for if it works and
I think I'll follow my gut, which is that I'm not going to particularly want to be associated with, you spent 30 to 50,000 and then tore it all up?
Exactly. So that's why I'm voting for number 1.
That's why I'm voting for number 3.
I'm voting to support what Councilmember Clay wants.
So I think we have the votes for what is option 2 on the cover sheet, which is mill the worst sections of the street and resurface, estimated cost 30 to 50,000, and that will require a budget amendment, which we will get in January.
Am I to assume that the work should proceed prior to the budget amendment? So we
Yes.
should talk to our contractor, get it scheduled, and then
Yes.
go through Councilmember Clay about the public notice?
Sure, it also involves...
Dan's ward?
No, it's Ward 1 on Philadelphia.
No.
No, we're only doing,
We're only doing Ethan Allen.
We're not gonna do
Oh,
The worst sections of Ethan Allen.
I think all the worst sections are on.
Are in my ward, yeah, of course.
Yeah, so it's wards 2 and 3. And
Thanks.
if there isn't anything else, we are adjourned. Have a good holiday. We will see you next year.